A loud click from the lock came from the huge double door. Then another loud noise was heard. It could be heard even from the street. It was coming from the window. The room's maid approached the window and pulled back the heavy, thick curtains. A red-haired woman in a robe approached the empty, dark fireplace. She lit the lantern and said she was now ready for anything. It was called The Legend of the Blue Flame. When the kingdom of Gerent was just being formed, there was a story that the great archmage helped the king and betrayed all his enemies before the blue flame. However, with the death of King Ephron Gerent, the archmage faded into oblivion, leaving behind only a prophecy that said when someone would pronounce his name again, for their sake, it will rekindle the blue flame. Many years later, another story began in the northern lands of Irel. At first, the man who hid his face under a hood remained silent. Then he turned around abruptly, and then he asked the girl sitting in front of him who she was. The girl said she was glad to meet the archmage and smiled. The archmage's true name was heard, and he asked again what the girl had called him. He took a sharp step towards her and asked who the hell she was. The girl herself wondered who she was, and it turned out she was simply a common villainess. And ordinary. She was an ordinary office worker in Korea, until one day she was sent on a business trip and suffered a plane crash. When she opened her eyes, she realized she had become a character in the novel of Lady Catherine, a story about a sweet but unfortunate girl who captivated the hearts of 5 men who held high positions in the kingdom. She didn't take the place of the main character, Catherine. She didn't become her love interest or a side character. She was reborn as the villainess who never managed to kill Catherine, named Everia Oberon. As the Duke's most precious daughter, she seemed to have it all, but behind her beautiful appearance and her distinguished family background, a nasty temper was hidden, and what she certainly didn't have was a loving fiancé. For Crown Prince Cashin was only interested in Catherine. She tried to kill the main character, hoping the prince would change his mind, and her plan was so doubtful that she was caught immediately. The prince told Everia that she was a terrible woman. If she even thought about killing Catherine herself, Everia thought it was nonsense. The first golden fish that Catherine caught on her hook was Crown Prince Cashin Geraint, who by the end of the novel would become king and husband to the protagonist. The girl who had the fate of ending up in Everia's body thought that the poor thing didn't understand men at all. She didn't understand why she had to be like the real Everia and be a fan of the crown prince who would be happy with Catherine anyway. But she herself had completely different plans for her future life. She would be able to spend the rest of her life as a duke's daughter, having fun and eating whatever she wanted. Everia believed that a person's love written on a piece of paper couldn't be of any use. So she told him it wasn't murder if Catherine didn't end up dead. Cashin exclaimed that he didn't even understand what she was saying. Everia said that, whatever the case, she intended to break off the engagement, after which she would leave high society and would live in peace. She asked if that would be enough. Everia stood up and walked past the prince to leave. Cashin couldn't even immediately understand what was happening. The girl walked past him and headed towards the exit, and he turned to look at her. In the end, Everia said that meant they would never see each other again. After the engagement to the crown prince was broken, the Duke of Oberon exiled Everia to one of his family's estates. Anirel, located in the far north, this cold and desolate place seemed to Everia the perfect place for her planned life of leisure. At least that was what she thought, until she found herself in front of an empty fireplace in her new home. No one told Everia in advance that it would be so cold here. She irritably asked the maid, who had come to offer her more hot tea, if they always lived in such unbearable conditions. Everia wanted to know why the fire wasn't burning. She was very cold and could have frozen to death. The maid bowed deeply and muttered something unintelligible in her defense. The only trees that grew on the Irel estate were black acacias, but they turned out to be so dense that they weren't suitable for firewood, which left the inhabitants of the estate with no choice but to rely on imported wood. However, a week ago, the Oakle Company, with which they had been partners for the last 100 years, suddenly broke off the cooperation because the Oakle Company belongs to the first prince's family on his mother's side. The House of Melial, the first prince, Lidon Gerent, lost his mother, who belonged to a family of counts. Quite young, thus he became an unfortunate prince, losing his position as crown prince to Cashin, whose mother came from a ducal family. The crown prince's relationship with Everia was terrible, and he died immediately after the main character's wedding. He had committed suicide, just like Everia, so she had always felt sorry for him. But now he had the courage to stab her in the back with that knife. Now she was angry, because if Lidon Geraint felt so sorry, then he should have resolved this situation, and not have hurt Irel. Him. Everia knew she couldn't do anything, so she ordered the maid to add some black acacia wood to the fireplace, ignoring the fact that the maid was surprised by such an order. Everia assured her there was nothing to worry about. She had an ace up her sleeve. So, returning to the beginning of the story, she named the name of the great archmage that she once read in a book. His name was Teocarus. No, she said when he appeared before her, and then she smiled. She suggested that now she should call him the demon Teocarus. The man she summoned looked at her thoughtfully and skeptically. So, the great archmage, also known as the founding hero, was actually a demon made of the blue flame stone. Geraint, the founding king, signed a treaty with him to establish the kingdom. The demon asked if in front of him was the descendant of that idiot who wanted to become king 100 years ago. Why was Everia's energy completely different? The girl replied that before giving any explanation, she would like to make a wish. She needed the power of the blue flame. This statement made the demon smile. Neither flame, the demon repeated, and then said she was good. He asked her what she exactly wanted from his love: money, fame, or power. She only needed to say one word, and the demon would burn everything to ashes. But Everia replied that she only needed the most common fire. The demon was perplexed. Was it really possible that all this started with a simple fire? Everia explained that she needed fire because it was extremely cold there. She wanted to light the fireplace, but the wood wouldn't burn, so if the demon lit a fire in it, he could be free. Come on, Everia said bluntly, looking at the demon. She just needed him to light the fire and leave quickly. Well, you can go, she said when the task was finished. The demon replied sadly that he couldn't do that. Everia asked him with a smile what he meant by that. He took a few steps towards her and asked if she didn't know. The demon came very close and loomed over the girl, looking into her eyes. He informed her that the demon she had just summoned only made lifelong contracts. Soon a warm flame crackled and burned in the fireplace. It was hot, and Everia moved the chair to the fireplace, because that was how one could live. With a laugh, Everia commented that she always thought the flame would be blue, but it wasn't that blue. Then she remembered that the demon had said he must fulfill his summoner's wishes for the rest of his life, and asked if demons were really that stupid. The demon replied that normally they paid him for it with blood, war, pleasure, and the man who would later be king would hand over his firstborn. Everia was the first to summon him without paying anything for it. He didn't understand at all how she managed it, but Everia believed that this was explained by the fact that the demon's name was erased by the gods from people's consciousness of the whole world, and she simply ended up in the plot of a famous book. Everia thought about it and said that since she had summoned him, she would take responsibility. The demon jumped up and asked if she would allow him to kill and fight, but Everia replied that she would give him rations and provide him with a bed. The demon fell to his knees and shouted that he was in trouble, and Everia asked him if he really wanted her to entertain him. The demon asked what the girl was actually good at. Everia reminded him that the demon must fulfill all her wishes unconditionally. She wished for him to neither eat nor rest, but simply to stand facing the wall. Upon hearing this, the demon begged that this was too much. He realized that he had fallen into a terrible trap where people would behave like this. Hearing his complaints, Everia thought that if she looked at him closely, he was even handsome, and in any case, it was better to take care of him than the crown prince. She approached the demon who had been telling her how cruel she was and said his name. He raised his head and told her to just call him Harry. Then Everia decided to make another wish. Harry said that he was no longer thinking about murder or fighting, but he wouldn't stay with his face against the wall either. But she wanted to talk about something else. She needed him to not kill her, but to protect her. Harry explained to her that he still couldn't cause any harm to the summoner. Then Everia explained to him that she needed him not to let her die. And there was one more request that would make Evria's life much easier. She asked if Harry could change his appearance so as not to stand out so much. It was just that he was too handsome. He was too striking for everyone around him. The demon liked these words. He quickly leaned over Everia and asked if she thought he was handsome. The girl replied that she didn't understand why he was so surprised. It probably wasn't the first time he had heard something like that. Harry, smiling dazzlingly, said that he thought she simply didn't notice his beauty, which was why she seemed so indifferent, but he was willing to do something so as not to stand out so much ever again. The next moment, in the man's place, a snow-white dog appeared. Because demons can change their appearance if necessary, they possess the soul number that connects their hypostases. The dog asked Everia what she thought of his abilities. He was really very cute. It was absolutely impossible to resist petting such a dog. But the dog quickly scurried away and declared that he considered this to be too intimate contact. He asked her how she was going to explain to the others the sudden fire that had appeared in the fireplace, and Everia replied that she was a sorceress. Harry said that he didn't understand everything about that. He looked at the girl suspiciously. Approaching, he seemed to sniff Everia, and then asked if her magical power was only half a unit. Mages can control and use the magical power in their body. The greater the magical power, the stronger the mage. However, this is an innate quality, so no one can change it. Usually, this magical potential is measured immediately after birth. With the power Everia had, she couldn't even light a candle with her power. Compared to her, Catherine was a true professional with her 9 points. Everia replied to Harry that a simple maid wouldn't tell her anything about her magical abilities anyway. Because, after all, she was a duke's daughter. Harry thought it couldn't be that simple. But all the people in the house were very happy that the fireplace could provide heat again. They really believed it. They said the lady was simply magnificent, that the black acacia was really burning, that it seemed like this tyranny would finally end. Harry was seriously surprised by how much joy this very ordinary light brought. Everia claimed that the flame appeared thanks to her persistent prayers, so now she could be considered a sorceress. This raised some questions, but they didn't ask them. But everyone wanted to know what kind of dog it was, although Everia would have liked them to ignore the dog. Everia replied that she had picked up the dog on the street and thought it was a stray dog, so she decided to take it in. The butler looked at Everia and carefully asked her what she thought about having a smaller dog. Everia replied that she liked this one absolutely and without a doubt. She was going to keep it in the house, no matter what. Everyone else had to agree with what the lady wanted. However, they said that first they must find out who lost the dog, and if they don't find the owner, then they can keep it. Suddenly, Everia realized that she could hear the sounds of crying. The butler was absolutely touched by the miracle that the young lady's kind heart had performed. The lady, with such a low level of magical skills, saved everyone from the cold. Now there was no need to worry about firewood, so all the servants wanted to thank her. And Everia replied that she was simply frozen herself. People exclaimed that they knew that rumors coming from the capital could not be trusted, and that they really wanted to ask the lady for forgiveness. Everia replied that she didn't understand what they were talking about. None of that was so important. But the servants continued to praise her mercy. They believed that if they spread fire and heat throughout the mansion, everyone would be extremely grateful to the lady. Well, okay, Everia said confusedly. Everything worked out after all. At that moment, the governor of Irel was in the room of Baron Insisha. He received a report of a fire that was capable of burning a black acacia. The daughter of the Oberon house tried to hide it as best she could, but her strength clearly exceeded what was said about her skills. The governor was more than sure that that was the Duke of Oberon's strategy, because this family could boast of a history and power comparable to the royal family. But they might also have a child with even greater power. He couldn't believe she had managed to hide it until now. Perhaps the Duke wished to test the legend of the North with his daughter's help. Lady Everia. Here, in the northernmost part of Araya, a new flame will banish suffering. The bedroom was finally very warm, and Everia slept listening to the soothing crackle of the fire in the fireplace. Everia seemed completely peaceful as she slept in her bed. Harry sat next to her and watched her intently, wondering if the girl was really as deeply asleep as she looked from the outside. Finally, he said that it was all absurd. That night, Everia told him she was going to sleep, so he would have to get off the bed. She was indignant because Harry was pretending to be a real dog, even though he was actually a demonic creature. Everia dragged him off the bed, and the dog resisted with his 4 paws, claiming that he didn't want to get on the sofa. Everia was very excited then, but she fell asleep instantly. Perhaps it was because she was still very young. Harry wanted to know what else his summoner wanted, although she said she didn't need anything at that moment. The sooner she comes up with her wish, the sooner the demon will get great pleasure. Suddenly, something caught the demon's attention, and Everia also started to move under the blanket while she slept. The door opened slightly, and Harry started to wake his summoner. She asked what was wrong, and the demon replied that there was someone in the living room. He wanted to make sure it wasn't the assassin. Everia retorted that it was unlikely that anyone would want to do that, since she was only a duke's daughter. It turned out to be a maid, who was doing something near the fire lit in the fireplace. Everia stood in the doorway and asked out loud what the maid was doing there at that hour. "Ah, my lady," the maid shouted, turning quickly. Everia looked closer. It seemed this girl's name was Emma. She remembered her face a little. The girl fell to her knees and desperately begged for mercy. She was very scared. Everia looked at Harry and asked him if she really seemed that scary. The demon replied that there was a bit of that in her. Emma explained that she was in a completely desperate situation, and that was the only reason she had decided to commit such a brazen theft. Everia asked what exactly the maid was going to take from her. Then she said the girl didn't have to say anything, just take what she needed and leave. Everia said that the things in this house had no meaning to her, especially if someone was so desperate to steal them. Emma asked if in that case she could also take that fire. This surprised Everia a lot, and the girl thought the lady would still refuse this. Everia asked what was going on with the flame they wanted to spread during the day. The maid replied that the Baron had forbidden taking it outside the mansion, and even inside the building, he ordered it to only be used when necessary. Everia thought about these words. Finally, she said that the Baron must have reasons to be so worried about the fire's safety. But in her opinion, this couldn't be more important than the lives of people dying of cold. But if Everia carried the fire herself, the Baron shouldn't have any complaints. Everia told Emma to guide her to where she wanted to take the fire. When they went out, Emma warned them that, as expected, there was a security guard on duty. "Let's go," Everia said confidently, leading the way. The door creaked, and the guard asked what was going on there. Everia told him he was working very hard at such a late hour. "Ah, my lady," the guard exclaimed upon recognizing Everia. Everia told him to open the gate because she was going out for a walk. The guard was surprised that the walk was taking place at such an hour. Everia pointed to the dog and explained that the baby was exhausted and was asking to go for a walk. The guard wanted to suggest she do something, but he didn't have time because Harry growled and grabbed his arm. Everia slapped him angrily and explained that, as everyone could see, the dog wouldn't go for a walk with anyone but her. The guard said the Baron had ordered it, and besides, it was already too late. Everia patted the dog on the head while he looked at her sideways. She asked how someone dared to block her path. At that moment, she was extremely threatening, and Harry also growled, scaring the guard. He shouted that he would let them pass, but begged them not to cut off his fingers, and Everia thought that if he was really scared, then her image as a villain would at least be of some use. Although the words about the fingers surprised her a lot, Emma immediately explained in a whisper that there were rumors about the lady making stuffed animals with fingers. Everia asked the gossips what they thought they should do with them afterwards. Emma replied that she hadn't specified, so she didn't know. Everia didn't know either, as she had never done that before. At first, Emma couldn't believe that the lady had never done that. The door creaked and opened, letting them out. Emma walked ahead, showing the way to the lady, and the guard stood looking around in bewilderment. In the end, he couldn't take it anymore and rushed to catch up with the girls, offering to go with them. Everia asked the guard why he had followed them, but he replied that he had done so because it was already late. And it was dangerous. Everia said she believes they are not the only ones in danger at this moment. The guard turned his head again, attentive to any unknown danger. Then he turned to the somber Everia and Emma, who were behind him. He asked with horror what he should do now. Everia sighed deeply and told him to stop whining and follow her. If he got into trouble, she could always say she had dragged him along with her. The place they arrived at turned out to be a shelter, as the sign said. Emma explained that that was where she spent her childhood. She said an adult could somehow survive in such conditions. But in this shelter, there were only children. The door opened with a creak, and a voice from inside greeted the sister. A group of scared and trembling children huddled together, all of them recognizing Sister Emma. The demon said that if things were so bad, then everyone here should have already died of hypothermia. Everia ordered the guard to throw what they had brought with them into the fireplace. They placed black acacia they had collected on the way into the fireplace. The children clung to Emma and told her that, apparently, their sister had forgotten that wood doesn't burn. Emma replied that she knew, but that she only had one solution. The children looked around suspiciously at the whole strange company that had come to visit them. They still kept some distance from Everia, but the dog and the guard were surrounded by a crowd. The children ran to Emma with joy, and Everia thought all this was because she had a villain's face. Emma told her mistress that everything was ready. "Now there will be fire," Everia announced out loud, lifting her lantern high. Everia walked past the children, who watched her fascinated. Someone pushed someone in the confusion. Someone screamed loudly. A very loud roar was heard that deafened everyone around. Everia dropped the lantern, with the flame she had brought from the mansion. Emma watched in horror what had just happened. The children looked confusedly at the fallen lantern, rolling on the floor. The cause of the incident was that the children were trying to put out the fire as quickly as possible, even snatching it from someone's hands. Emma trembled at the thought that the fire the lady had brought here, with such difficulty, had gone out. She cried and said it was her fault, but the children persuaded her. Everia said that looking at Emma, the children also started to cry. Emma couldn't calm down, because without this fire, all the children would die of cold. At this, Everia could only sigh wearily. Harry said, turning to the dog, which was looking around with curiosity. She asked him to light a fire. He asked her if she was sure everything would be okay, since there were many witnesses there. Everia replied that they had no other choice anyway. The children's hands clung to Emma's clothes. The children were crying and trembling violently from cold and fear. Everia thought of many things after seeing it all with her own eyes. The demon said he would fulfill his summoner's wish. His magical flame shone in the darkness of the night. A burning fire blazed in the fireplace, and everyone in the room huddled together to get more warmth. Emma's face was still streaked with tears, but she lifted it towards the golden light of the journey. The girl who caused the lantern to break reached out her hand towards the fire. Fascinated, she asked Everia if the new sister who came to them was a sorceress. Everia put a finger to her lips and asked them to keep that little secret. They decided to return home, although Emma was allowed to stay with the children until morning. Everia told Emma and Lord Lionel to keep everything that happened here today a secret. Emma said that, to tell the truth, when she found out she would become Lady Everia's maid. She was completely desperate because of all those absolutely terrifying rumors. But today, the lady revealed her secret to her and helped complete strangers to her. Emma hugged the children, who had never left her side. She swore she would faithfully serve her mistress all her life. The next day, Everia woke up in her room in the mansion. The maid asked with a smile if the lady had slept comfortably that night. The butler asked if the lady liked the food. The gardener was in a hurry to tell her that today was an absolutely wonderful day. All these people were impressed by what Everia had done, and now they wanted to express their feelings about it. Everia just wanted to run away from them, wherever her eyes looked. In her room, she closed the door behind her and slid to the floor. Emma asked sympathetically what had happened to the lady, and Everia replied that she didn't understand why everyone had suddenly become so friendly. And the maid explained that it was because all the people who worked on the estate were local residents. This morning, Everia spoke to the Baron and asked him why he didn't distribute the fire. Because, after all these people are inhabitants of this land. If there are no special reasons not to, then everyone can be allowed to use the fire. After this speech, the Baron said that in this case, he will share the flame with all the inhabitants. Emma said that after the lady personally carried out these negotiations, now she can't even imagine how grateful everyone is to her. Emma was delighted that everyone now knew the lady's true face. Everia stepped away from the conversation, but then told Harry that she simply had to do the right thing. The maid offered to bring the lady some tea. Emma went to the door. There was another maid who whispered something to her. Emma turned around with a very worried expression on her face and closed the door again. She reported that Prince Cassian had arrived to meet with the lady. Everia and Harry were extremely surprised that this happened suddenly. Everia just couldn't believe she hadn't dreamt it. They had broken up, but for some reason he suddenly decided to go to her, even though they planned to never see each other again. Since they had broken off their engagement, and Everia planned to leave high society and live quietly. Everia tried to remember if there was a similar episode in the original novel, considering that it always revolved around Catherine. It was possible that not a single word had been written about it. Everia hoped Cassian wouldn't cause too many problems. Long time no see, Everia. The girl heard. Still radiant, he sat in a chair with a cup of tea and said that, compared to the time when he was in the capital, Everia now looked much better. She was stunning again, with her golden hair shining. Cassian hadn't changed at all since their last meeting. Everia asked if His Highness had arrived incognito, although she thought that if he had been smarter, he would have realized that anyone could tell at a glance that he was the crown prince. She asked him what was wrong. Cassian replied that it was even more amazing to see it with his own eyes and that, living in such a remote place, she was coping very well. but they were talking about Everia Oberon herself. Cashin noted with a chuckle that he wasn't by her side. Everia didn't understand what the hell was happening, that this had happened to the prince. She said they had joked enough, and that now it was time to finally discuss why Cashin had come here in the first place. The prince simply said he was there to see Everia. He claimed that Everia was just pretending that everything was fine, but that she must feel incredibly lonely without him. The girl thought that was how the prince had managed to deceive Everia all this time, and keep her close to him, while she, blinded by love, did everything for him. Now, however, a completely different soul was looking at him through Evria's eyes, and she realized that Harry seemed much more attractive than Cashin. With a soft smile, Evria turned to the dog and petted him. Cashin claimed he had come to this end of the world to comfort her, since he thought she was heartbroken. But Evria replied that in that case, His Highness had come here in vain. She asked him if he thought the breaking of their engagement was something very important to Everia. "Oberon, Eve," Cashin suddenly exclaimed, jumping from his seat, and neither Everia nor Harry understood why he had that nickname. Cashin said he never imagined he could feel true love for someone. That's why he got engaged to Everia. But when he met Catherine, Cashin couldn't even imagine marrying anyone other than her, because she was his true love. Everia asked skeptically if the prince would like her to bring him her congratulations. This is exactly what he wanted, for her to wish them a happy future. It seemed like complete nonsense, but Cashin was sure that Everia would bless them happily. Everia couldn't believe she was hearing such nonsense. Cashin took a few quick steps towards the girl. The prince took Everia by the chin. He said with a smile that Ev's father refused to support the mining business. Cashin has been having a lot of trouble with this lately. He leaned over Everia, started to arrange her hair strands, and said it would be difficult for him to make her queen now, but that if she agreed to cooperate, he could offer her something more interesting. Everia knew what the prince was referring to with all his smiles. He was talking about a magic mine that was located in the eastern part of the empire. It is believed that there are huge deposits of stone there, but no one has taken on this project due to the high development costs. However, the Crown Prince's faction, sponsored by the Oberon family, took on the development of the mine, trying to gain an advantage in the fight against the first prince. But of course, after the engagement was broken, the Oberon family abandoned their sponsorship. Everia wondered if that was the reason he had arrived there in such a hurry. But she felt the cold-blooded Duke wouldn't have listened to his daughter's request anyway. Harry thought that even under such terrible circumstances, this bastard was allowing himself to do this to his summoner, which made him furious. The white dog, like Snow, pounced on Cashin and threw him to the floor with a growl, and then threw him off Evria's chair with magic. The girl asked the demon if he had done all that a moment ago, and the dog complained in a low voice, who else could it have been? Cashin grabbed his head and still didn't understand what had happened. "Your Highness," Evria said, getting his attention. She said she didn't understand at all why His Highness had decided that she would be pleased with such an offer coming from him. Evria knew the prince probably hadn't even thought about it, but now she didn't feel attracted to him. The prince clearly couldn't expect such words from her. He looked surprised. Evria said now he would have to beg her to get what he wanted. The prince's entourage waited behind a closed door during this conversation. The enraged prince quickly left the room, closing the door behind him, and declared that they were all returning to the capital. Standing in the doorway, Everia, with a radiant smile, announced that she wouldn't accompany him to the exit. Cashin didn't even turn around. He was simply boiling with rage. As he went down the stairs, he suddenly tripped and started to fall. Sounds of falls and screams were heard. The entourage was worried if His Highness was okay. Evria asked Harry if this was his prank again. When the demon replied affirmatively, the girl thanked him and kissed him unexpectedly. Despite the state the demon was in, he managed to blush at these actions of Everia. But she didn't explain anything and walked away. The entourage rushed to pick up the prince, who had fallen down the stairs. Someone said the prince has been very tired lately. He also fell recently, apparently because his legs have become very weak, and this has worried everyone a lot. Everia waved her hand and said that a weak body didn't mean the end of the world, and then she advised the prince to hold on. After having dealt with the visitor, Everia could dedicate her time to more pleasant things. For that she had hot tea and sweets to accompany it. Everia stretched happily and declared that all this gave her great strength. Harry asked if his summoner was happy, and Everia replied that they had managed to get rid of the man who was talking nonsense. The demon complained that it was good that at least the summoner was satisfied. and happy, but at this moment he was very sad. Harry remained somber and just twisted a lock of Evria's hair between his fingers. Evria said again that the tea was incredibly delicious. Harry complained that the summoner was so happy that she could taste the tea even if she hadn't taken a single sip. And the demon himself still felt unbearably sad and melancholic. Evria replied that he repeats the same thing every day. He talked about wanting to spill blood and suggested starting some kind of war. Harry replied that it was all because he couldn't satisfy his basic desires. For the sake of the summoner, he even took care of that idiot prince. Besides, he held back with all his might so as not to kill anyone. But he was angry because the summoner didn't even ask him if he was okay. Everia replied that she already understood everything, so he might as well stop biting her hair. Harry jumped up and asked hopefully if she would really allow him to kill. Everia stroked the demon's hair and said he was a smart guy, and she was very grateful to him. Harry begged her to stop, and then said he suspected she still thought he was a dog. Despite his change of appearance, Everia replied that his hair felt very pleasant to the touch. She approached him again, and the demon asked what that had to do with it. Harry said that the summoner should know what a great demon he was, and Everia replied that she knew, and suggested that they eat more cake. Harry doubted that she could know or understand anything. Everia noticed that the demon always took everything they gave him, but he didn't even pay attention to how the maids were surprised every time they saw them eating. Everia said that now they believe she can eat 10 portions at a time. But all this food is consumed by Harry, who thinks he eats to relieve stress, because he cannot satisfy his true desires. Everia asked if this was true. Harry explained that for a demon, killing is a basic need, like a human's desire to eat. He won't die if he doesn't kill anyone, but this torment is like death. It seems he will have to eat like a pig all his life, so as not to die. Everia said she understood now. Harry assured her that he was trying very hard, although it didn't show in his expression. Everia wanted to know if the demon could use other methods to do this. The question of other methods was clearly difficult for Harry, and he had some solution. Everia jumped up. If there were these same methods besides food, she would like to know something about them. She demanded that Harry tell her quickly what it was. He replied that anything would do as long as it brought him pleasure. Everia asked what it could be. For some reason, Harry didn't want to answer her questions properly. Then he asked her how old Everia was, and she replied that she had turned 18, which was the year she was considered an adult. Harry grimaced and said she was still such a child that he wouldn't tell her anything. Then the girl asked him how old he was. He replied that he was 2,176 years old. Everia said that it turned out he was quite a grandfather, to which the demon objected that he didn't age like people do. Then he said he couldn't do that to her anyway, and that she should stop asking. In the land of Irel, in the Black Forest, there is a place where wyverns live. Wyverns were aggressive and carnivorous creatures, similar to powerful dragons, since they fed on humans, and it was crucial to control their numbers by destroying the eggs they laid before they hatched. Emma told this to Everia, and then explained that, however, it was not so easy to do all this. That is why every year they received help from the royal family. If the northern trade route was attacked, then the royal family would suffer losses due to the blocking of the supply route. These words made something clear to Everia. That's why 2 of Catherine's fish suddenly arrived in such a desert. The first prince, Lidon Geraint, was known for his bad relationship with Everia. The royal knight commander, Elroyce, also had a confrontation with Everia at one point. His whole life was guided by a set of rules and laws of chivalry. In the original novel, he despised Everia, the main villain and conspirator who tried to kill Catherine. But as he was a knight, he couldn't openly show his feelings towards her. In any case, until the 2 of them left, Everia would not be able to leave her room. However, then it occurred to her that since she was in the main building, and the knights were in another, they shouldn't meet. She thought so, but still it turned out to be too careless. The guests were in her path, and Lidon noticed that Lady Oberon looked wonderful. Everia would like to know why. Emma explained that Irel is famous not only for its cold weather, but also for its hot springs, and suggested visiting them. Everia thought she could avoid the receptions. She was only going to soak in the hot springs, but she had to stay in the room. The water in the springs was clear and surprisingly clean. Both visitors also came here. Everia said she didn't expect to find them here, since she had heard rumors that they were very busy here. Lidon said they were still on duty. Then the prince noted that the girl seemed quite good for a person who had shaken up the royal capital. In fact, before joining this organization, Evria worked at a trading company. There she had to constantly listen to her boss's complaints, so she was already used to it. They could accuse her as much as they wanted of causing a commotion in the capital. Hiding in such a place, asking what else she did in her free time. Evria knew that if she acted with indifference, they wouldn't be able to continue their attacks. And when they finished talking, she asked if she could go, since she had come to bathe in the hot springs. Lidon was indignant because she talked about hot springs, and in general, that she was doing quite well after trying to send someone straight to hell. Evria realized that, unfortunately, her interlocutor hadn't finished with his reproaches yet. She turned calmly to the prince. She asked if that man's life had become a real nightmare, which didn't seem to be the case. Besides, everyone seems to have forgotten that both of Everia's interlocutors abandoned their fiancés and cheated on them with Catherine. Then Everia noted that she still wouldn't have accepted the crown prince's return. However, the girl admitted that she realized she used unacceptable methods. So now she was going to live in Irel for the rest of her life, atoning for her terrible sins. She asked if maybe they just didn't believe that villains could reform. She asked if you remain a scoundrel forever just because you did something wrong once. It seemed that the prince, who was supposed to take care of his people, was going from one extreme to the other, which caused Everia, as a resident of the kingdom, to have her own worries. After this, Everia left. She was going to soak in the hot water. This was exactly what she had needed for a long time. She asked Harry why he was keeping so far away from her. The demon replied that he was comfortable there, but Everia objected that he was too far away, and that they should look each other in the eye when they talked. Everia shouted for Harry to also come bathe in the hot springs. After observing the demon carefully, the girl assumed that he was simply shy. Harry didn't turn around, but he shuddered. Everia laughed. It seemed very funny to her that despite his impressive age, he was so innocent, and even demanded not to call him grandfather. Harry approached, but told the girl to get out herself. The girl hadn't even had time to understand anything, and he was already leaning over her. "It's time to go," he said, and began to pull Evria out of the water. He took her in his arms, and his disgusted face was so close, but a moment later he put her on the boards. Evria realized that all her things had become dry, and also so soft and delicate. She asked how this was possible. Harry replied that he did it with the help of magic. He claimed smugly that at first glance it might seem that evaporating moisture from the body is simple. But in this matter, one must be very careful. Everia said it's almost like a hairdryer. Harry asked again what a hairdryer was. Everia tried to explain that it wasn't a person, but an object that dried hair. Harry still didn't understand, but he asked if people with similar abilities were called hairdryers. He exclaimed that then he must be the best hairdryer, because no one else could dry hair so perfectly. Everia realized that she was too lazy to argue, that it was easier to agree. To say that Harry was the best hairdryer in the world, as it couldn't be otherwise. Everia left the baths. Harry was accompanying her now, in the form of a large white dog. They realized that they weren't alone there. Lord Delray was waiting for Everia before leaving the baths. The Lord bowed to Everia, then turned around and left. Everia couldn't understand what had happened. He really was just going to leave like that. And that's it. Harry asked if this guy was a Royce puppy, and Everia confirmed it. The demon said thoughtfully that for some reason he reminded him of the boy who was next to the idiot who summoned him last time. The demon found his taciturnity especially familiar. Harry claimed that at first he thought this man couldn't speak at all. These were his first words in 3 months, and apparently you can't fool blood itself. Everia thought that he stayed silent in the novel itself if he spoke once per hour. Then it counted as 1 beer if he spoke twice, then 2 beers. And he usually didn't reach 3. The descendants of this silent man don't speak to this day, as if they had traded the ability to speak for the ability to wield a sword from Harry's point of view. The descendants of the idiot turned out to be idiots too. Everia noticed that Harry clearly liked Cyril a lot. She felt disappointed by this. The demon explained that it was because Cyril was a strong boy. He thought strong people were very interesting, and Everia asked him if he thought she was boring because she was weak. Harry replied that she was boring not because of that, but because she had no ambition. Harry said that conquering the world might help her, for example, but Everia said she would rather remain boring. Night fell and the full moon shone in the sky. Everia said the hot springs made her too sleepy, so she was going to go to her room. Upon entering the bedroom, she found Harry lying on her bed in human form. She asked the demon what he was doing there. Everia said she was very sleepy, so Harry would have to stop acting foolish. and get out of there. The demon objected that they usually sleep together. The girl said that this is when Harry is in dog form, and now he should stop acting foolish. Harry replied that no one was joking here. He was also completely serious when he said he wanted blood, but Everia still ignored him every day. So she also needs to feel how painful it is when you repress your basic needs. Everia replied wearily that she would have liked to hear him complain for longer, but that she was too sleepy for that, so she staggered and walked away. She lay down on the sofa and said goodnight to Harry, who tried to object that that wasn't what he wanted at all. He pressed his forehead with his hand and called his summoner. He said he felt like he had reached his limit. The fire in the fireplace crackled pleasantly. The moonlight fell on the table, which was near the window with the curtain drawn back. Harry approached the sofa and leaned over Everia. "Harry," the girl said, looking at him. She asked him if he had decided to bother her in that way now. Everia said that he could complain all he wanted, but that she wouldn't start a war for him, and that, in general, he needed to get off her because he was too heavy. The demon didn't let her get up and pushed her towards the bed. "Harry," the girl said, looking at him. She didn't understand what was happening. He was acting strange. She asked him if he could hear her at all. She asked again out loud if everything was okay. Harry got even closer to her and told her it was very difficult for him. He wrapped his arms around Everia's shoulders. The demon leaned towards her and suddenly bit her on the shoulder. Everia didn't understand what he wanted from her. She repeated the demon's name out loud, but he still didn't respond. Everia pushed him and said that she was actually talking to him. The girl told him to pull himself together and pushed him hard away from her. Harry covered his head with his hands and shouted that she was hurting him. He asked why she hit him, and Everia asked him if he had come to his senses. Harry asked why hit a demon who hadn't even done anything. Everia exclaimed that he couldn't consider himself having done nothing because he almost ate her. Harry stared in shock at the bite mark on the girl's neck. He couldn't believe it was him who did it. Everia asked him if he really didn't remember anything at all, and Harry replied that that was true. He said he didn't understand at all why there were marks of his teeth there. And judging by his appearance, he wasn't lying. Everia saw it. Harry explained that he had simply reached his limit. He didn't know something like that would happen. Everia asked him if that was the reason why he had attacked her to eat her. And now he was shifting the blame from his sick head to his sane one. Harry said he doesn't usually act like that, because he is a demon with a high level of self-control. But this is the first time he has had to be without blood for so long, so he is simply going crazy. Everia thought that in the end, all this would end with her being eaten by a man-eating demon suffering from his unsatisfied desires. She didn't understand why all this was happening to her. One way or another, they needed to find some solution to this problem. After all, the demon kept behaving in an extremely annoying way. And although Harry reminded her that he was the best hairdryer in the world, his maintenance required considerable expenses. They studied books together in the library, found information about extraordinary powers for revenge, world domination, and all of this was completely inappropriate. Everia realized that for some reason, everyone always summoned demons, only for something on a large scale, for revenge or world domination. Harry explained that this was a normal phenomenon, because no one summoned a demon just to light a fire. Everia asked how they would find a solution to their problem. Harry said that the easiest thing would be to start a war, and Everia was indignant, saying that she was doing everything possible for Harry, but that he remained stubborn. The demon chuckled. He didn't believe Everia was doing anything for him, because in reality, she simply wouldn't want to be eaten. Everia said indignantly that of course she wouldn't want to. Harry couldn't think that anyone would voluntarily accept something like that, and Harry replied that he wasn't referring to being eaten. He wasn't talking about any food at all. Everia asked him what it was about, if he wanted blood and not meat, and if that was the case, she could give him some. Harry was visibly surprised, sighed, and said he didn't understand at all what he could talk about with that little thing. Everia said she had promised to donate blood to him, and she didn't understand why he was upset. At that moment, a loud shout of many voices was heard from the window. Everia walked to the window and saw a crowd gathered in front of the mansion. Everia remembered that today the army would go to fight the wyverns, which could take them a whole month. Such a long period of time simply enraged Everia. She didn't want to sit in her room all day, so she wouldn't accidentally run into these fish. Emma explained that wyverns are vulnerable to sunlight, so they can only be defeated around midday. There was nothing to be done about it. With a sigh, Everia asked why wyverns were so strong. Suddenly, an idea occurred to the girl. She asked Harry if it was difficult to defeat the wyverns. The demon replied that it was true for humans, because they even had difficulty breaking their eggs. Then Evria asked him how he was doing. She wanted to know if it would be that difficult for him to do it. Harry replied that the summoner had no idea of the magical power he possessed. Excellent, Evria replied, looking at him with a smile. The demon looked at him, very bewildered. Evria announced that she and Harry would go to war to relax. That day, the sun was shining brightly over the forest, and there wasn't a single cloud in the sky. Commander, one of his knights, said to Sir El, he thought the commander should take a look. He showed exactly what he found in the empty nest. Sir El looked and realized that someone had killed all the wyverns. They could only find the monsters' corpses. This had been happening for more than a week. Even a single wyvern was difficult to kill, but now they die in packs daily. He informed his prince that a search party is investigating the matter, but there are still no results. The prince said it must be a beast stronger than the wyverns themselves. Most likely, the right thing to do was to return all the knights and ask the capital to send help. He said he didn't think it was a beast. The prince then asked who it was. According to his interlocutor's opinion, traces of fire were found on the wyverns' bodies, but animals are not capable of using fire. The prince said his enemy was clearly intelligent and also very strong. He asked what the probability was of it being a human. The prince looked very carefully at his interlocutor. Lord El, Royce was neutral, so he shouldn't have ulterior motives, but the question was how the royal family would react. In the kingdom of Geraint, the firstborn has the right to inherit the throne. However, after the death of Lidon's mother, Cashin took his place as crown prince. However, there are still people who support him. The queen sent Lidon to dangerous places and restricted his freedom at every opportunity. And it was she who sent him to the troops led by Lord Elroyce. She hoped that by making a mistake, the prince would give her a reason to reproach him. But then an unknown creature appeared that possessed unprecedented power. Lidon thought about what he should do now. At that moment, the hellfire devoured the monsters, and Evria watched it. With a triumphant smile, Harry killed and destroyed everything around him with his fire. Evria saw that the demon seemed to be having a lot of fun. Judging by the way he was frolicking now, she really had summoned a demon with extraordinary power to this world. The torn-off wing of the mangled wyvern fell in front of the girl and hit her. Harry noticed this and stood there holding his tail in his hand. Tossing it aside, he laughed and gestured for Evria to go. She asked if this would really be enough, since Harry had been saying every day that he didn't want to go home. The demon replied that it seemed to Evria that all of this was too boring, and the girl was surprised that after only a week, he suddenly became affectionate. Harry approached, walking through the blood, and said his summoner had gone a bit quiet. He looked at her intently and wanted to ask her something. Finally, he asked if Evria was afraid of him now. Harry said that compared to useless humans, he possesses incredible power, but he treats his summoner very carefully, so she shouldn't be afraid of him. Evria said she didn't understand what he was talking about, that she was simply bored of waiting. At that moment, another huge wyvern descended directly upon them. The monster landed with a crash very close by. Evria saw the wyverns gaze very closely and heard its growl. The huge wings flapped and folded noisily. Evria thought that this wyvern was simply huge. She felt Harry grab her by the shoulders and pull her towards him. The demon asked out loud what the wyvern was doing there. Evria asked if it was a wyvern, and Harry confirmed that it was. The monster suddenly spoke, said it was the boss of the wyverns, and greeted the man. And the demon. Evria whispered in Harry's ear that she thought wyverns were just animals, but it turns out they can talk. The demon replied that she was simply special, because this creature had been alive longer than Harry himself. The wyvern leaned down so it could look the people in the eye, and asked why the demon killed its relative. Harry answered the question with another question. He wondered when demons needed special reasons to kill. The wyvern boss lives in the south, and now suddenly appeared here to find out. The wyvern turned to Evria and told her that the person who was the summoner could explain why it was necessary to kill the wyverns, and that she needed to know the reason. Evria thought that if she had known this, she would have thought of another way, but now she would have to answer the question somehow. She said that if a demon doesn't satisfy its killing impulse, it starts to lose its mind. So they looked for a way to solve the problem and finally started catching wyverns. The wyvern growled that there was another way to satisfy this desire. Harry shouted that that method was very small, even if it seemed large. He asked if the wyvern's relatives, like demons, didn't protect their small offspring. The wyvern looked at both of them and thought. It leaned over the girl, studying her and even smelling her. Then the wyvern said that that man was actually too young, but it still didn't understand why they wanted to exterminate its relatives. Everia explained that they interfered with trade, logging, and subsequent timber extraction. Everia admitted that she had simply been told that the wyverns were harming people. She didn't even know they spoke the same language, and now she felt a pang of conscience in her heart. The wyvern said that now they can control trade and all logging, so it's time to stop this. Many small wyverns died. The leader was now sad for its relatives. Harry shouted that it was also difficult and sad for him to bear it, and the wyvern boss was the only one among them who possessed such abilities. Everia thought that, of course, Harry's problems required an urgent solution, but killing intelligent beings for this purpose was cruel. Harry tried to explain to the summoner that it was simply natural selection, a law of nature. Everia looked at the charming eyes of the wyvern leader. She simply couldn't bear that gaze. Everia stated firmly that they wouldn't kill wyverns anymore, ignoring Harry's indignant shout. In return, the wyvern gave the girl its scale. It said that now its relatives would recognize her and obey her. Everia examined the gift she had received, wondering if the wyverns would now recognize her and would listen to her orders. The wyvern boss called Everia a clever little person, a blue squirrel. She began to laugh when it talked about the bright blue squirrel, and Everia also burst out laughing. Everia realized that it was a great compliment and thanked the wyvern leader for it. Of course, said the wyvern boss, then it was about to leave, but it could be called if necessary. It called Everia Starfish and said it knew how to call her. The wyvern boss took off and said goodbye, saying it would gladly fly back at any time. It flew away, Everia said, looking at it. Harry shouted at her. He was furious that the summoner could do this to him because she abandoned him, and sided with the wyvern leader. Everia explained that either way she was in a losing situation and that her conscience was bothering her. She said she also liked Harry and that she would eventually find another way for him. She was thrilled with the gift she received because it was thanks to Harry that she now had the wyvern leader's scale. Suddenly, a noise was heard, and Everia turned to see what it was. In the sky, they saw a flock of many wyverns approaching them. An entire flock flew, flapping their wings, snorting and growling. They all landed on the ground and surrounded Harry and Everia, looking at them intently. The wyverns fawned over Everia, and the girl asked their forgiveness for having murdered their relatives. Now, suddenly a loud scream from someone was heard, and turning around, Everia saw Lord Lionel. She was completely perplexed and didn't understand what he was doing there. The knight was very scared. He fell to his knees, surrounded by many wyverns, but continued repeating that he would definitely protect the lady. Everia asked, bewildered, how did he intend to do this? Sorry, murmured Lord Lionel, looking at her confused. Everia asked if Lord Lionel was going to protect her with the sword, which was quite a distance away from them. Soon another shout was heard, several voices calling the lady at once. Everia tried to understand what else was happening, where all those armed people were coming from. Everia sighed resignedly, despite having come so far to leave in secret. Soon one of the wyverns rose into the sky, with riders on its back. They flew closer and closer to the full moon. Everia and Harry were sitting on the wyvern's back. Lionel was being gripped by the creature's claws. Harry asked if Everia was afraid, but the girl was absolutely delighted. She replied that such speed even left her breathless. Everia said that it couldn't be compared to traveling in a carriage or on a horse. She didn't see how she could use it in any way. She could think about this later, but now the wyvern with riders on its back was approaching the residential buildings. Presidential, people noticed a silhouette against the night sky and shouted that it was approaching a wyvern. The wyvern landed on the ground, and Everia told no one to touch it. Everyone wanted to know what exactly was happening there and asked Lady Everia. Everia said she would like to speak alone with Prince Lidon. Ignoring the noise of the crowd, Everia said that, as everyone could see, she had made a new friend. They entered the house and turned on the study light. The prince asked Everia if she had really tamed the wyvern. The girl replied that everyone had seen it with their own eyes. Lidon asked if there was any guarantee that she could completely control this creature. Everia replied with a smile that she had no reason to lie to him about it. Lidon crossed his arms over his chest and declared that he had no intention of letting the royal family find out about all this. Everia wanted to ask His Highness for a favor. The prince looked at the girl thoughtfully. Everia said Lidon could inform the royal family that the wyvern problem had been solved. Lidon asked sadly what he would receive in return. Everia replied that she would no longer have to see people she didn't like, because she planned to stay and live there. If the wyvern problem is finally solved, the royal family will no longer be interested in Irel. It will be a wonderful way to finally improve relations. When Everia said this, Lidon asked if this was really all she wanted. Everia was surprised that he spoke of this with such disdain, because for her, it was very important. Besides, she really didn't want to talk about that with the crown prince. She didn't like him. He had arrived recently and had made her terribly angry. Everia looked at her interlocutor in the original work. Lidon disappeared suddenly when Cashin became king. A few months later, his bloodied watch was discovered on a distant continent. Cashin's hired assassins had probably dealt with Lidon. Everia and Lidon were the only characters in the book who ultimately died. Probably that's why Everia felt they had something in common. Okay, said Lidon finally. He declared he would accept the poison chalice she was offering him. Everia replied that there was no poison there, so she suggested discussing all the details tomorrow. After all, it really was late at night already. The door creaked as it opened. Everia stretched demonstratively and declared that she was too sleepy. Then the girl froze and turned sharply to look at the man who was behind her. She asked Lord Elroyce why he was following her. She looked at the silent night. Harry was next to her in the form of a white dog. Everia thought Royce didn't seem to be going to answer her. She asked him if he would accompany her and pointed out that, in reality, she had a dog with her. Royce replied that it was already late. Then the knight added that he couldn't allow the lady to walk alone. Upon hearing these words, Everia suddenly became extremely agitated. The knight had a simply stunning and beautiful voice. Not only was he handsome, but that rough voice hit Everia straight in the heart. She told him he had such a magnificent voice that it was completely incomprehensible why he was always silent. Because if she were in his place, she would talk all day. Everia looked at him with curiosity. Harry was standing next to her with a very skeptical expression on his face. Royce was strangely thoughtful and still didn't answer. In his memory, a crowd of youth surrounded a smaller boy, took his sword away. They mocked him and harassed him. In vain, he tried to persuade them to return his sword. They laughed at him because he cried like a baby. The Royce family was famous for its knights, but as he was small and frail, his brothers constantly bullied him. Before puberty, his voice became an object of constant mockery. They demanded he stop whining like a girl because it was very annoying. After a time, when he had already grown up, he learned that his brothers were simply jealous of him, since the purest blood of their family ran through his veins. Over time, he matured, and the timbre of his voice became deeper, but he still finds it difficult to speak loudly with people. And now Evria Oberon was saying he had a beautiful voice. It was hard to believe that this was the same Everia Oberon he knew. At first it seemed to him that she was mocking him with her dazzling smiles. However, now her words sounded very sincere. Royce looked at the girl with a completely different look. It turned out she wasn't who he thought she was. Everia noticed how his expression changed. She didn't understand what had suddenly happened to him. It was as if he had heard a compliment about his own voice for the first time in his life. After all, he should have overcome all his complexes long ago, receiving compliments from Catherine. But at that moment, Everia remembered that the story of his complex appears in the second part of the work. This occurred around the time of Catherine's wedding to the crown prince. Everia realized that she had made a mistake, and Royce said it was time to leave. Everia asked if by chance Harry knew any magical way to erase memories. The demon looked at her and said that such a service was no longer offered. Everia claimed that Harry Potter knew about it, and the great demon wasn't capable of it. Harry asked who Harry Potter was, but Everia thought it didn't matter anymore. Everia bowed demonstratively and said she would say goodbye after all. She hurried out of there as quickly as possible. She closed the door behind her hard and loudly. Royce didn't have time to say anything after her. Lady Everia Oberon, he said with unusual thoughtfulness. With a cry of frustration, Everia collapsed onto her bed in her room. She didn't understand what to do now. The only thing she could do was hope that he wouldn't place special importance on the words of some villain. Harry gave the girl a sullen look. The demon lay down on the bed beside the girl. "Summoner," he said seriously, looking her in the eye. Harry wanted to remind her that he was actually very offended. Everia remembered the reasons and asked if Harry believed she had gone beyond what was permitted by killing several dozen wyverns. The demon replied that there was no way he could do it anyway. The demon seemed completely depressed. Everia looked at him very sadly. She asked if Harry would continue to be angry with her. Everia leaned over him, so it would be easier for her to look him in the eye. Harry quickly turned his back to Everia. Everia tried to change her position, so she could continue to see his face. The demon wasn't going to give up. He turned over on the bed again. Everia moved again. They did this a few more times, until Everia got tired and asked how much longer they were going to do it, since she was starting to feel dizzy. Harry turned over and said that one more time, because if they stopped now, it would mean he had lost. Everia simply stretched out on the bed, declaring that everything was very refreshing. She said she knew how important it was for Harry to see blood. She is also very worried about this. She will definitely find some way, so the demon needs to trust her. And wait a little. She thought that, of course, other monsters also lived in other lands. But if they started exterminating them, then this could result in a political problem. Everia asked the demon how much longer his patience would last. Harry replied that if he didn't use magic, then for 2 months, but if he continued to transform into a dog, then for a month. A month was a very short time to solve a serious problem. Everia said that if she didn't find a way within this month, Harry would simply twist her neck. The demon was indignant that such a thing could happen to him. He stated that something like that would never happen under any circumstances, so Everia simply needed to find a way. Harry said it would be better if she simply shared her plans regarding the proposal made to the prince. If the knights rode the wyverns and became dragon knights, they probably wouldn't have an equal in this world. Everia suggested, as that would show that the wyverns were under her absolute control. As Everia had their leader's scales, she could ask the wyverns to cooperate with them. The wyverns lose their eggs every year due to war, and humans also suffer great losses, so both sides would only benefit from the alliance. Of course, Everia believed that it was the Knights of the Order of Ice who should ride the wyverns. Besides, she had the skin and claws of a killed wyvern that she received from the royal family. Everia said that humans wouldn't be able to capture these creatures if they relied only on their own strength. The royal family had nothing to lose even if they became even more powerful. They shouldn't have any doubts about such loyalty. Everia asked Prince Lidon what his opinion was on the matter. Lidon replied that such a tempting offer confused him, and Everia suggested he include only positive aspects in his report. For example, that was a very quiet and peaceful place. Everia said they would never see each other again. She asked the prince to bother her exclusively if he didn't like it. Lidon asked what the girl meant. Everia asked if he was going to keep pretending he didn't understand what she was talking about, even if she were talking about wood. After all, the Oakle Company unilaterally terminated the wood supply contract. Everia reminded them that Irel was always terribly cold, and that wood was vital to start the fire. So such an act was simply inexplicable, despite the fact that it was known that the Oakle Company was obsessed with money. Lidon said that the agreement with Irel was objectively beneficial, and that his uncle wouldn't cancel it due to his personal problems. What's more, he believed that it was Irel who unilaterally terminated the agreement. Everia looked at Lidon with misunderstanding. The prince's expression also showed confusion. The whole situation seemed very suspicious. Everia thought deeply about everything that was happening. Losing. She said that Count Melian was in charge of the Oberon family's affairs and the Oakle Company, a man who would benefit if both sides suffered losses. Everia asked if Lidon had anyone else in mind. The prince replied that he could only think of one person, but that he didn't want to accuse him without grounds. Everia asked if there was any way to prove His Highness's assumption. Lidon replied that he had a very reliable informant. Everia thought he was referring to Luke, the head of the Information Guild, who gathered information from the back streets, and was also a genius of disguise. Despite his social status, Luke was a close friend of Lidon. Lidon met him by pure chance when he was hiding from everyone. They overcame several challenges and became true friends. Together with Catherine, of course. If you ask Luke, he will surely be able to find out everything. Lidon said he is indebted to Everia, and therefore will definitely pay her back. Everia clarified that if he wants to reward her in some way, then she will only accept money. This must be taken into account. Lidon said, laughing, that she was just like her uncle. He thought that was good. He was ready to make this promise. The conversation with the prince went smoothly, but that wasn't all. There was one unforeseen issue remaining to be resolved. This same issue affected the wyverns and their interactions with potential riders. During their training, the riders were too afraid of those they had considered monsters just the day before. And their enemies. Everia and Harry watched these training successes with skepticism. Everia said she had heard it yesterday, but now she saw with her own eyes that they couldn't even climb them. The knights normally serve a single master of the Oberon family, but almost all of them are loyal to the Duke, while the fifth company is hired to fight the wyverns in the dark forest. And they don't swear allegiance to any member of the Oberon family. Everia thought that previously she had thought she would kill 2 birds with 1 stone if she resolved the conflict with the wyverns and hired the knights. The Baron said that this unit was hiring anyone who wanted to join. This land was cold and exhausted, so there were few candidates. This is why people like Lord Lionel Dilf are members of this order. But looking at it closer, all of this seemed like a quite desperate case. Prince Lidon approached and said it seemed the Dragon Knights were having a hard time. He suggested simply sending the wyverns to the Royal Order of Knights. Everia asked if His Highness had heard the saying that greed is the beginning of all sorrow. Lidon said, with a smile, that it was simply funny. Their relationship had improved so much that now they could joke with each other in that way. Everia asked skeptically what would happen if he really didn't like this result. But the prince just laughed in response. Lidon said that she treats him very coldly. Everia looked at him and agreed with this. Then she looked at him even closer. She would like to understand what all those looks mean. After all, if one looks closely, Lidon really looked like a prince. Everia turned away from him demonstratively. Lidon turned to her and handed her an envelope, asking her to accept it. He explained that he had promised to pay her back, and Everia assumed there must be money in the envelope. She said His Highness pays his debts quickly. We'll see, he said, opening the envelope. Everia froze when she saw what was inside. She asked if that was really what she was seeing, and Lidon replied that of course it was. In the envelope, the girl found a blank check in her name. She muttered that it didn't seem risky to the prince, since she could now put in everything she wanted. Lidon replied that Everia didn't seem like the type to risk an exorbitant amount. Everia burst into laughter, and then asked since when His Highness began to trust her so much. Lidon said that at the hot springs, she asked him if he believed that villains could reform. He really always believed that people were incapable of just changing like that. However, the prince spoke thoughtfully, and then declared that he could no longer remain so distrustful, because now he had a living example before his eyes. He asked her if Everia was going to return to the capital. She replied that it wasn't her decision, and then she thought that in the original work the Duke didn't invite her to return. Lidon admitted that not everything would be too simple, because the Duke's anger still persisted, and the attitude of all of society. He said he thought they would see each other again in the capital. Lidon said the check could only be cashed in one place, the Royal Central Bank. Lidon said goodbye to Everia and said they would see each other in the capital, and the girl shouted that he was just a rascal. She shouted for him to return quickly. She presented the prince with a generous gift, with whose help the prince could hold out a little longer. One could say it was a small act of kindness towards her fellow death partner in the original text. Lidon went to his residence. He walked down the hall towards the inner chambers. Upon seeing those who were there, he said he wasn't expecting any guests at all. The man in the hooded cloak announced that a letter had arrived for Mr. Inmani. Inmani being the code name for an informant or the head of the information gathering guild. Lidon thought this message must be from Luke. Lidon asked if Mr. Inmani had said anything else. The messenger confirmed that that was all he had been told to deliver the letter. That's right, said Lidon, and then added that in that case it wasn't Inmani who sent him. The next moment, something whistled between them. The messenger stepped back, not allowing another blow to reach him. Lidon froze in front of his guest with his sword drawn, and the messenger asked him if he had really just attacked him. The messenger changed his appearance and exclaimed that the prince clearly knew it was him, but it wasn't clear since when. Lidon replied that he knew it was Luke from the beginning. Luke replied that it shouldn't be like that, since he had disguised himself perfectly. Lidon explained that the letter the messenger delivered was too thin. The content of his order surely wouldn't fit on a single page, and furthermore, he doesn't convey information to other people verbally. Lidon explained that these were the reasons why he immediately thought of Luke, and Luke agreed that Lidon Jeradson's powers of observation were quite good. Lidon asked what the answer to his question was. Luke said it was something a regular employee of the guild should have discovered. Lidon asked if there really was no answer to either of the two questions he had asked. Then it wasn't clear why Luke had come. Why did the great informant come to such a remote place? He wondered. Through the window, knights could be seen training with wyverns, and it was quite obvious that something very interesting was about to happen here. Lady Everia was sitting, petting a large white dog when she was told about the festival. Emma asked if the lady would like to go to the festival to relax and send off the team at the same time. Everia laughed and declared that those knights who always fell off the wyverns made her very sad. So Everia decided to accept and told Emma that since she was a local, she could also go with her. Seeing that the girl wasn't happy with the invitation, Everia asked her directly if she had planned to go there with someone else. The maid replied that, of course not, it was her work schedule. The maid asked her if she planned to go with the prince. Everia was skeptical about the idea of going anywhere with a guy like Prince Lidon. Emma exclaimed in alarm that the lady couldn't talk about the prince like that, but Everia objected that she was also talking about the king. She dismissed the maid with a gesture and said that she didn't see anything wrong with it, because Emma and her colleagues probably also talked about their mistress in a similar way. Emma hastened to assure her that she would never do something like that. The girl even started sobbing with emotion, assuring her that in front of the lady, or behind her back, she would never have allowed herself to do something like that. Everia hastened to interrupt that torrent of words and said she already understood everything. Emma assured her that she liked the lady a lot and had always liked her very much. She asked the lady not to worry about those who gossiped behind her back, even though all these ungrateful people survived only thanks to the fire that the lady shared. Everia thought that she didn't even think about worrying about such trifles. Emma said the lady was too kind and didn't give it importance, but that she had to punish them somehow. Everia was surprised that they were now calling her too kind. Emma said that anyway, she just wanted to say that she liked the lady a lot. And Everia replied that the maid must be in a very good mood. Everia realized thoughtfully that this was the first time someone had treated her with such warmth. Emma exclaimed that the lady should go to the festival today with the prince, not with her, to show the lady's true nature. Everia decided it was a strange conclusion. If she appeared with the prince, it would demonstrate her position in society. She doesn't plan to become famous just through someone else. That was what she told Emma. Emma replied that the lady, of course, shines on her own, so she doesn't need anyone's help. But she can simply perceive the prince as an ornament used for going out. Like, for example, expensive status earrings. Everia noticed that Emma had just compared His Highness to a piece of jewelry, and wondered if she had surpassed her mistress in disrespect. Emma replied that the lady even spoke ill of the king. What a lady must keep in mind when choosing jewelry is that with its help, she must shine even brighter. And that's what men are for. Emma remembered that this was said by Madame Louise, the author of incredible erotic novels. At that moment, their conversation was interrupted, and they were informed that the lady had a guest. The guest turned out to be the Knight Royce. He entered the room and greeted Lady Everia. Everia said that Lord Royce must be tired of waiting, but she had a small misunderstanding with the maid. 30 minutes before, the maids had been fighting to style and apply makeup to Everia, exclaiming that Lord Royce wasn't a prince, of course, but he was a knight, and a knight was also quite suitable for the role of companion. When Everia came out to Royce, she couldn't immediately interpret what the expression on his face meant. Maybe he was very angry, but the knight believed that it wasn't necessary to wait so long. He expressed his hope that he hadn't bothered the lady too much, since it seemed she was about to go somewhere. Everia replied that, after talking to him, she would go to the festival, so everything was fine. Everia looked at her guest with curiosity. Who she was talking to now was perhaps someone behind Royce. She said it was just a joke, and there was a confidence in his voice that hadn't been there before. The knight's expression again seemed strange, as if the whole situation were very uncomfortable for him. But the lady herself said his voice wasn't that strange. Everia replied that, of course, that was true, but she didn't expect him to mean it now. It seemed that her unintended words helped Elrace overcome his long-standing complex. And this should have happened to him thanks to Catherine's influence. He had a minor role in the novel, and his voice problem was probably the main plot point. The knight said that in the morning he had observed the knight's training, and a thought had occurred to him. Tomorrow he would return to the capital, so he had suddenly come to see Lady Everia. Showing discourtesy by doing so, he handed Everia the book he had brought with him, and she was surprised that he could call that a lack of respect. This book described how to put armor on a horse. It also talked about saddles and stirrups. Royce suggested that this could help in riding wyverns. Everia thought it was absolutely amazing. She suggested they sit down and study it all together. They discussed that wyverns are larger than horses, and their range of motion is quite intense. So a saddle is absolutely necessary. It must be used together with the armor. Weight also matters. Everia said the idea was good, but there could be problems with production. Harry added that dwarves could do it very well. He was referring to people with dexterous hands who could manage if they were given the right materials. But these people were hard to find. They were rather withdrawn and didn't like people. They live in very remote villages in the mountains, but if you manage to find them, you can try to persuade them. Or threaten them. Harry suggested doing this, and Everia said that he is the best. Everia thanked Elroyce, and said that later she would find a way to reward him for his good advice. Emma entered the room and brought tea. She asked if they had finished their conversation, and were now going on a date. Together, said the knight, and Everia said she had already explained to the maid that it wasn't like that at all. After all, she mentioned this misunderstanding before. Everia said that the maid herself, for some reason, thought they were going on a date, and looking at the knight's face, she thought he even shuddered at such a thought. Royce said he was sure the lady had already arranged for someone to accompany her. Emma exclaimed that without her, the lady would be left completely alone and wouldn't be able to properly enjoy the festival. The maid's gaze showed how much she wanted the knight to invite the lady on a date. Emma was absolutely radiant, imagining that Everia would be there alone. Royce simply had to invite her on this trip to the festival. Everia hastened to object, as Emma was exaggerating as always. Royce suddenly said that he was inviting Lady Everia Oberon to go to this celebration with him. What? Everia asked again, looking at him confused. The festival was a vibrant event, with many visitors and festive fireworks displays in the sky. Artists played music in the streets. Stalls sold a wide variety of delicacies. Everia looked around and thought everything was very beautiful there. She turned and looked at her companion. During the whole walk, Royce didn't say a word to her amidst all the noise and the surrounding din. He was the embodiment of silence, and everything was terribly uncomfortable. Suddenly, another voice familiar to Everia called them. Prince Lidon greeted them and said that just looking at them made him uneasy. Everia replied that the prince, with his face, didn't fit into all that either. Lidon remembered that it was he who told Lady Everia about the opening of this festival. Then he told them to call him Eden. The knight Elrays told him not to lean on him and that it was wrong to use a fake name. Elrays said it wasn't pleasant to lie, and the prince chuckled, saying that Royce had always been a good knight among them. Everia thought that she really wanted to go home and didn't understand at all what she was doing in the company of these small fish. Harry tugged on her skirt and suggested that he and the summoner continue without those people. Okay, said Everia, petting the dog. They walked away, and behind them, Royce asked his interlocutor what he was doing, because pretending to be a member of the royal family was a crime. He demanded an answer as to where the prince was, clearly not recognizing him. Luke, exclaimed Royce, grabbing the smiling man by the neck, and he replied that he hadn't done anything terrible to the prince. He had simply put him to bed after giving him a sleeping pill. Luke replied that he hadn't come for him and asked him if he would let him go. The knight replied that he wouldn't turn a blind eye to anarchy. Luke wondered when Royce had started talking so much, but just now, he looked like a teenager on his first date. Royce turned around and said that it didn't matter what he did or thought. There was no need to judge him, and Luke asked him if he had really gotten into the swing of things. Then he told the knight not to bother him, and at that moment a terrible roar was heard. They saw a column of flames at the end of the street. The noise clearly came from that direction. Luke and Royce wanted to know what happened there. Lady Everia, a loud shout echoed through the crowd. But in one of the stalls they were playing a shell game, or rather, a game with shot glasses that the scammer handled with skill. He assured that this doesn't happen every day, that you just have to bet and win. The crier exclaimed that nothing could be simpler. The chances of winning were better than 1 in 3, and if you got it right, you could triple your invested coins. You just had to try. There's something similar here, said Everia, and a very close voice asked her if she would like to try it. Everia shuddered. It was Harry, who had scared her with his sudden appearance. She asked why he was suddenly there in human form. The demon replied that it seemed to him that Everia herself had already begun to forget that. In reality, he wasn't a dog at all. He asked if he looked like a dog now. Harry looked at Everia intently. His eyes were shining. Everia thought with emotion that every time she saw that face so closely, it seemed completely unreal to her. Everia, indignant, asked the demon how he dared to seduce his mistress, to which Harry noted that she seemed to like being the summoner. Everia replied calmly that she really liked his face, and not him himself. But the demon didn't see any difference. The girl replied that admiring someone's face and loving their soul can be completely different things. The demon didn't understand what was wrong with her, and Everia suggested that he think about it for himself. And for that, she put her hand on his chest. Harry was completely confused. He didn't know why she had her hand on his chest and what he was supposed to understand. Together they walked down the street, Harry whistling something. Then Everia sighed and told him he could forget about it. She suggested to the demon that he look better there, and again pointed to the man with the glasses. She observed this man. The children who were playing with him noticed that the man had replaced something and now demanded that he give their money back. The children were crying. The scammer was smiling and asking if anyone could provide him with proof. His behavior was simply disgusting. Everia whispered to Harry that she wanted to teach this scammer a lesson and asked for his help. The demon had to understand exactly how he was cheating so that Everia could get the money. He had to intervene somehow. Harry approved of her wish but chuckled, declaring that he had a faster way. He snapped his fingers and demonstrated what it was, and a column of flames rose above the scammer's tray. Everia looked at the fire and understood that it was time to escape from there as soon as possible. Harry, triumphant, he asked her how it was. In fact, they had hastily escaped from the scene, and now Everia was trying to catch her breath. Harry asked, somewhat worried, if the summoner was okay. She exhaled again and groaned that she hadn't done any sports for a long time. The demon looked at her and told her to catch her breath first and then talk. Suddenly, someone grabbed the girl by the hand. With a cry of fear, Everia stepped back and tried to hide behind Harry. It was a man in a hooded cloak who was offering something to Everia, urging her to take it. What? Everia said, bewildered, still clinging to the demon. The stranger had a ring in the palm of his hand. He said it belonged to the lady. Everia replied that she didn't believe it, but the stranger kept insisting that she look at it more closely, since it was definitely the lady's thing. The stranger grabbed Everia's hand and squeezed it. Everia took the ring and looked at it intently. It was a light metal ring with a bright red stone, and Everia didn't understand why it was there. When she bought it, they told her it was an ancient ring made with the heart of the sun god. She bought it on a business trip to Peru before she entered the book, and after buying the ring, she got on that unfortunate plane. The stranger in the cloak disappeared suddenly, and Everia tried in vain to call out to her, to understand exactly where she had gone. The strange woman disappeared completely and never returned. The world around them remained real, even if it was that of a book. Everia thoughtfully turned the ring on the table, which clicked. The girl didn't understand absolutely anything about what was happening. She supposed it could be another ring of the same shape, but it could also be that it really was the same sun god ring. And the size was exactly right. Harry said he didn't feel any power coming from the stranger, but there was an unpleasant feeling. So he suspected something from the beginning. Everia simply didn't understand what was happening. Emma entered and announced that the knights were returning to the capital. She asked if the lady would like to accompany them outside. Everia didn't quite understand why she had to say goodbye to them. When Emma said the lady wouldn't be able to see Lord Royce for a long time, Harry just rolled his eyes. Emma explained that yesterday the knight was looking for the lady after the explosion incident. And at these words, Harry suddenly became alarmed. He complained that it seemed that the summoner hadn't discovered it on her own, so she should tell him that she wasn't his servant. Emma's blood smelled completely different than usual to the demon's sense of smell. Everia thought that Emma didn't have a twin sister, which meant that someone was simply imitating her. She wondered who was capable of such a thing. Emma asked anxiously if her mistress was listening. Everia replied that of course she was listening, but thought it could only be the head of the Information Guild. Luke, Lidon asked Luke to find out about the situation with Errol and the Oakle Company. Luke must have found the order interesting, and that's why he came here in person. The Information Guild has a strict rule against killing people, so Emma is probably fast asleep right now. Everia thought she regretted that Luke had only come for business, although she also had an idea of how he could have a little fun. She turned towards the fake Emma, who was smiling happily. Everia put her foot in front of the maid and told her she had a request. She asked her to give her a massage because her legs were terribly sore after the walk. She laughed and wondered at Emma's confusion, because the maid always did this. So, what was so difficult about it? She shook her slipper-clad foot towards the fake maid and told her to hurry up. Everia could see that Luke was clearly having trouble with this. He wasn't ready to stretch the legs of Everia Oberon, for whom he felt disgust. That same Luke was a king who ruled over the criminal underworld and over people's weaknesses. And now he had to do a maid's work and massage someone's feet. She hoped he would simply refuse, because in this world, touching her feet was considered a sign of incredible devotion. Although this was too much for such an arrogant guy, he accepted. He said he would do it now, surprising Everia greatly. She couldn't even resist expressing this surprise too clearly. Emma dropped to the floor next to her mistress's chair and said she had always done the same. She asked if life in Irel seemed uncomfortable to the lady. After all, the lady arrived in their distant lands from the capital itself. In Irel there were no balls, no receptions, no tea parties, said the fake Emma. But Everia was thinking about something else, that if it weren't Luke, that was the man she would want to hire as her personal masseur. Everia said that lately she has been enjoying the quiet life, so she feels much better here than in the capital. That's right, said Emma, but Everia could hear in her voice that her words weren't taken literally. The fake Emma laughed and said that the lady had adapted well and even managed to tame the wyverns. Everia thought that perhaps that was her purpose. Wyverns, she said with a smile. Everia shrugged and said that taming them wasn't so difficult after all. The fake Emma exclaimed that the lady was truly incredible, and Everia said that since Emma was her personal servant, she could tell her how she managed to tame them. Emma said she didn't think she should know everything about such important things. Everia replied that Emma wasn't an ordinary maid to her. There were some things she could only tell her alone. The fake Emma smiled and said it was a great honor for her. Everia leaned over the maid and whispered that she would now tell her the method by which she could tame the wyverns. She whispered that it was a song. These creatures turned out to be sensitive to sounds, so they can be easily tamed by singing, but it is necessary to sing a strictly defined song. The fake Emma asked what song exactly she needed to learn for this. Everia looked at her intently and smiled. There was really a very specific melody playing in her head at that moment, with words saying that Luke was just a fool. He still doesn't understand anything, and she tricked him. At that moment, Everia clapped and said the game was over. The fake Emma also felt that the circumstances had suddenly changed. With a crash, the fake maid began to get up from the floor. The crackling continued, and Everia watched with curiosity what was happening. Everything was truly impressive, and soon a red-haired man in a maid's dress was standing in front of Everia. And Harry, Luke said that for the first time, he had managed to unlock it. Everia replied that people evolve over time. She said that in any case it was good that he came, and suggested they sit down. Everia suggested they talk, but Luke wasn't very sure what they should talk about. Finally, he sat down and asked how Everia knew it was him, but the girl replied laughing that it was a company secret. Everia said she would like to ask the Information Guild for something. Situation, Luke replied that he wouldn't accept any request from her. Everia asked with a smile if he would regret it. She placed a piece of paper she had taken from her bodice on the table and said it was a blank check, that the amount didn't matter as long as Luke did the job well. Everia thought that it wouldn't be she who would pay anyway. Luke replied that that argument was quite convincing, so he was willing to listen to her, but he didn't accept requests related to Catherine. Everia replied that Catherine had nothing to do with it. She asked Luke to locate the dwarves' village, and he soon proved to be worthy of his reputation and of his blank check. It was in the Clouded Mountains, located to the northwest of the continent. Harry said that if Luke claims the dwarves' settlement is located there, then it seems true. Everia asked if the demon knows this place. Harry replied that he had gone there when that previous fool had summoned him, and Everia realized that he was talking about the founding King Geraint. He wanted to take possession of the sacred sword of Jupiter, located in that place, but he couldn't obtain it. Everia asked if Harry could do it, but he replied that there was no need for the demon to take out the sacred sword, and then asked who the summoner planned to send there. Everia was going to go alone, accompanied by Harry, who had once again taken the form of a white dog. And Fluffy, she asked Emma to try to disguise her absence well. Emma was worried because her mistress was going somewhere alone, but Everia didn't understand her concerns, and believed she had everything under complete control. Everia said she asked to love and favor Harry, who was her fairy. The dog asked if he could reveal himself now, and Everia said it was Emma. Everia explained that, in truth, Harry was only pretending to be a dog, but in reality, he was the one who helped her with his magic. She wanted to invite Emma to greet her new acquaintance. Emma couldn't believe the dog was talking. She simply collapsed to the floor in surprise. You must be very surprised, assumed Everia. They set off for the distant clouded mountains, which looked exactly as their name indicated. Dwarves need raw materials, so they often settle near mountain mines, where the energy of fire is also contained. Harry explained that that's why there is a dwarf village somewhere around here. Everia suggested they split up and look for the village. Then she offered the demon the cookies that Emma had packed for them to take with them. For some reason, Harry patted her on the cheek tenderly. She asked him why he didn't want cookies. The demon licked the crumb off her finger. He claimed he liked the crumbs much more than the cookies. Harry told Everia to call him immediately if she noticed anything strange, and then disappeared into thin air. Everia was walking alone on the path and couldn't imagine how she would find the dwarf village in the middle of these mists. Maybe she had to cast a magic spell, like in fairy tales, for a secret passage to open before her. Or she had to go through a labyrinth to reach her goal. Perhaps the only way to reach this settlement was by opening a magic portal. Suddenly, lost in her thoughts, Everia tripped over something and almost fell. She was sitting on the ground, and behind her, a sword stuck in a stone was shining. Everia turned around, needing to discover what she had tripped over, and saw a dagger. She approached. She wondered who had thrown the dagger in such a place. It was dangerous. The girl thought that if she left it there, someone else might trip and fall. Maybe she should have removed the blade. Everia began to rummage through her bag and complain that people were simply unbearable when they threw their things everywhere. That knife had been on the ground for an incredibly long time. The last thing she needed was to get dirty. She even thought she could accidentally cut herself and get tetanus, but she still pulled on the handle of the dagger, and it easily fell into her hands. The blade of the dagger didn't look dirty at all. On the contrary, it shone absolutely dazzlingly. "I was waiting for you, my lady, for the person who would pull me out." Suddenly, a resounding voice was heard. The next moment, Everia threw the sword. Everia exclaimed that the dagger was clearly possessed by a ghost. It shone so unbearably. She wanted to know if demons could exorcise ghosts. The dagger's voice replied that it wasn't a ghost, it was Jupiter. People also call it the sacred sword. The sacred sword, Everia said, was the same sword that no one could pull out. The dagger's voice said the lady had proven to be the most worthy, and Everia assumed that in that case there had been a mistake. The dagger asked its new owner to take it with her, and Everia agreed, provided, and that it would stop shining with such intensity, otherwise it would be blinding. When Everia took the hilt, the blade said it had a question for its new owner. It asked her why she was keeping it at a distance, and Everia replied that she was simply afraid of getting tetanus if she touched it. Blade replied that it didn't know what that tetanus was, but that it was really hurt. Jupiter was pulled out. Suddenly, a completely heartbreaking scream was heard, and Everia saw a figure somewhere in the distance from where it was coming. Everia wondered what happened this time. The red-bearded stranger was snorting loudly as he ran. This stranger had a heavy and very distinctive hammer. Everia looked at the short, red-bearded man in front of her and wondered where Harry was. While the stranger was surprised that Everia had managed to pull out Jupiter, she showed him the dagger and told him that if he was talking about that, then everything really happened exactly like that. Jupiter noted with surprise that it hadn't seen dwarves for a long time. Everia didn't understand the dwarf's reaction to all this. What if he wanted to hit her and take the sacred sword? She really wanted Harry to be here, by her side, as soon as possible. The red-bearded dwarf shouted that Everia would go to his village. His eyes burned with fire, and Everia ventured to say that she had an important matter to ask him. And the dwarf agreed that they needed to go talk. Everia said she just needed to call her companion, and this word surprised not only the dwarf, but also the sword. The dwarf said that if she meant that insolent blonde bastard, he was already at the village during the fight. Jupiter's scabbard gave a signal, so the dwarf ran there quickly. The dwarves' settlement turned out to be quite large, but not all the buildings had lights on. It was in one of these sleepless houses that Everia and Harry met. Everia asked if the dwarf could explain everything to her now, while Jupiter, meanwhile, was asking his mistress if her companion was by any chance a demon. The dwarf explained that Jupiter was a masterpiece created by their ancestors, but that the sword was very selfish, so only the owner it personally chose could control it. However, during all this time, no one managed to obtain its recognition, so the dwarves built a village here and simply waited for it to rot from the wind and rain. But now it had a mistress. The red-bearded dwarf leaned heavily on the table with both hands and said that was why he begged Everia to allow him to repair the dagger. Jupiter exclaimed that the dwarf was too loud, and Harry replied that he wasn't the one to talk about such things. Everia said that was fine, that she would trust him to repair the dagger, and Harry snorted mockingly. Even so, Everia wouldn't have been able to take the sword with her in such a deplorable state. Jupiter didn't like those words, and even asked if they referred to him. Everia said she still had one condition. She would really like to hire an expert blacksmith, who will be the one to restore Jupiter. The red-bearded dwarf asked her if she would take the blacksmith with her to the human village, and Everia replied that of course, that would be the case. The dwarf was lost in his thoughts, and Everia understood how difficult it was for the dwarves, isolated from society, to do such a thing. The red-bearded dwarf asked for a little time to consult with the others, to which Everia agreed. Everia said they would wait until dawn at the entrance to the village, ignoring Jupiter's objections that it didn't need to be restored because it was already absolutely impressive. Harry and Everia left the settlement, and the demon lit a magic fire to warm it. And light it. Thoughtfully he asked if the dwarves would agree, and Everia replied that of course. That should be enough to rebuild and protect the village. She said that if they refuse, the saddle can be transported on a wyvern. And then they saw two figures heading towards them from the settlement. "Hello," said Everia when the two reached her. Next to the red-bearded dwarf was his daughter, the same girl with deep red hair, who said that her name was Rapashi and that she was the best blacksmith in this village. Everia also introduced herself and said that, since it was her fault that Rapashi was away from her family for so long, she would like to do something for her. Rapashi replied that she had heard that a very interesting case was waiting for her. Everia confirmed this, explaining that she wanted to ask Rapashi to make saddles for the wyverns. Rapashi was surprised that they were referring to those same monsters, and Everia explained that she had managed to tame them. But riding the wyverns had turned out to be quite difficult. Rapashi was surprised that riding wyverns seemed realistic to anyone, and Everia replied that the wyverns would soon arrive here too, which was absolutely amazing. Rapashi said that if the saddle was for a wyvern, it would be better to use a solid structure instead of a divided one. Leather or iron could be used as material, but mithril would be the most suitable in terms of weight. Everia was happy to see that the blacksmith was clearly interested in this job. Rapashi shook her hand warmly and assured her she was more than intrigued. Everia said that since the sacred sword could only be restored here, she would wait for Rapashi to come to Irel later. The blacksmith promised to restore the sword in 2 weeks. Soon the wyvern and its riders were flying through the brightly lit sky. Everia said they were very lucky. They found the dwarves and got the sacred sword. Although she didn't quite understand how she managed to get the blade that not even that idiot could pull out. She hoped Harry would tell her something about this, but for some reason, the demon remained silent. Everia asked why her companion was silent. The demon said it was very unfair. Everia asked what exactly, and the demon said it was because of her name. Even he called her summoner, but for some reason, she allowed a complete stranger to call her by her name. Everia asked, bewildered, if Harry didn't know her name, and the demon replied that he did. Everia petted him and told him that then he could call her that, since he usually does everything his own way. So it's strange that he feels uncomfortable with this matter. Everia suggested that the demon try saying her name out loud. "Everia," said the demon, obeying her demand. The girl said, laughing, that everything turned out to be as simple as she said. After some time, a forge was built for Rapashi. He arrived in Irel with Jupiter, which now looked new. The knights diligently learned the basics, and everything happened without incident. Rapashi assured Everia that the armor definitely must be made of mithril. This was fine, but there was a small problem. Everia didn't know how to pay for this material. Everia, suddenly a truly thunderous shout was heard. The blacksmith's gloved hand produced a block of black acacia wood. Rapashi wanted to know urgently what it was. Everia explained that it was black acacia, which grows in these lands and can be found in abundance in the local forests. Rapashi seemed surprised that there was so much black acacia there, and Everia hastened to explain that the tree was unusually strong, so its wood was completely fireproof. Rapashi hastened to object and tell Everia that black acacia was a magic tree. Everia only knew magic stones that contained magical power that activated magic weapons created by mages. In the whole country, there was only one mine where this stone was extracted, but there were many problems with its extraction, distribution and storage, so its price was constantly rising. For this reason, Kashin's people decided to exploit a new mine, even if it wasn't wise. But for the first time in her life, Evria heard of a tree full of magic. Evria asked if Rapashi was sure of what he was saying, and the dwarf said that the insight of the best blacksmith could be trusted. Rapashi explained that the tree doesn't burn because magic prevents it. Evria asked if there was any way to check it, and it turned out to be easy. It is necessary to pour the tree's sap into the mold so it hardens. Once you have a sky blue sapphire stone, you will be able to attach it to a magic object. Then we will discover who is right, said Rapashi with burning confidence. Evria expressed her hope that Rapashi would win this argument. If it really turns out to be a magic tree, Irel will radically change the situation in the market. An exhausted Irel will rake in money. And then, apparently, Evria will have many new and unpredictable problems. Where a lot of money appears, unlimited power also appears, and besides, bugs will surely swarm to it. This situation is contrary to a peaceful life. But Evria needed money because she really needed to buy mithril. At that moment, the girl realized that she could simply leave the difficult matters to her father, and that would be a rational use of her father. Evria thought that if it really was a magic tree, then the Duke would surely want to personally handle such an important matter. And Evria herself, as its discoverer, will receive a considerable sum. Beautiful, perfect, she came out from behind the well-closed door, and the maids tried to understand that this was happening to their mistress. 2 days later, Rapashi asked Evria how things were going. The sky blue stone was shining brightly. Evria realized that the black acacia was really a magic tree. The sapphire made by Rapashi was immediately sent to the Duke, and while everyone was waiting for an answer, they wondered what would come of it in the end. Meanwhile, Evria decided to learn fencing. Her teacher was Lord Lionel, who volunteered to protect his mistress. He explained that no one else wanted him, everyone else simply ran away, and thanks to the lady, he got a decent job. As if she didn't have enough to do with taming the wyverns, Evria thought, she certainly didn't want to be treated like a noblewoman. So perhaps the frivolous Lionel would be a very worthy teacher after all. Then she told Lord Lionel that she was counting on his help, and he replied that she just had to trust him. He showed the girl the basic stance. Then he showed how to hold the sword, how to move with the left foot first. When giving his lessons, Lord Lionel often found himself a bit confused, as he was very afraid of making a mistake. He was completely in his element. Jupiter told Evria that, although Lord Lionel's movements were chaotic, he was in good physical shape, and that if he trained well, he could achieve great success. If you looked at him closely, you could see he really had a great body. Jupiter suggested to Evria what more could be changed in Lionel's movements and postures, and the girl relayed these words out loud. Dagger advised her to open his legs more, relax his shoulders, and straighten his back. And Evria simply repeated these words after him. Lionel didn't argue about this, but acted according to her instructions. He stood up as ordered and brandished his sword. Then Lionel turned to Evria, who was watching him, and told her that his movements had become much more natural. Evria chuckled to see how hard he was trying. Harry was dozing nearby, but opened one eye and skeptically said he could tell in advance how it would all end. With each training session, he was getting better and better. The strikes became increasingly forceful. Lionel tried hard and studied diligently. Of course, the training helped him more than it helped Lady Evria. She continued to relay the words of Jupiter, who didn't like the fact that his center of gravity was still unstable. Lionel managed to achieve such results thanks to Jupiter's advice. The sword assured him that now it wasn't embarrassing to watch him. As for Evria herself, it turned out that her body was so weak that she couldn't even run 2 laps around the court. And diligent training didn't help her at all. Jupiter laughed and said that perhaps the magic power in Evria's body was hindering muscle development, something that happened in very rare cases. Evria's body only had half a unit of magic power, so it wasn't clear why Jupiter had chosen her as its host. The sword assured her that it thought it would definitely need her, because someone who already mastered the sword to perfection would no longer need it. This led Evria to think that among all those who tried to pull out this sword, she was simply the weakest. While waiting for an answer, other people approached her. 2 knights asked her for permission to take a closer look at her sword. What? She asked again, looking at them bewildered. They were frightened by her stern appearance, as her sinister face appeared again. And yet she simply asked. They explained that there were rumors that Lord Lionel's new skills came from the lady's advice. Precise comments, a comfortable position that allowed everything to be seen clearly, attention to the smallest flaws. The lady, apparently, didn't even realize how perfect she was. Everia thoughtfully said that all this was so, but she couldn't explain it, and the knights, with shining eyes, they called her their lady. They assumed that she had no intention of learning fencing, but simply wanted to help the knights. She tried to object, to explain that everything was completely wrong, but the knights said that at first. Not knowing everything, they perceived the lady's desire as an unnecessary problem. But now they were all willing to follow the lady all their lives. Everia hoped that not everyone would bother her now, but now other knights began to participate in the training. Everyone was ready to perform the exercise under Everia's guidance, who spoke Jupiter's words out loud. She sat down and told us clearly whose back wasn't straight enough, and whose right arm was constantly hanging. She herself could barely understand what was happening, but everyone was very grateful to the lady. Harry chuckled and said he knew that would happen, but he told Everia to stay still and quiet since he wasn't going to help her. "You look good, Everia," said a voice that sounded familiar to me suddenly. The red-headed man who appeared on the training field was Everia's father. He said sadly that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. Everia said she didn't think he would come to see her personally. Harry asked her if the Duke knew why she looked so good now. Father and daughter froze facing each other, and the demon could only register the incredibly oppressive atmosphere. Jupiter asked the demon if the mistress's father really hated her. Harry replied that the sword itself could see that they looked like sworn enemies, and Everia reminded her companions that she could still hear them both. She told her father that dwarf Rapashi, the discoverer of the sapphire, could be found in the workshop. The Duke muttered something unintelligible at first. Then he asked if Everia would like to take him there personally. Everia looked at him questioningly. The air between father and daughter was electrified to the limit. Harry noted that they were as alike as two peas in a pod, and Jupiter agreed that that's why they say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Everia sighed deeply and demanded that they shut up already. She turned to the Duke and told him they could go. Everia said the forge was quite far from there and asked if she should order the carriage to be prepared. The Duke decided to make the trip on foot, and soon both were walking through the forest in oppressive silence. Everia kept glancing sideways at her father, feeling extremely uncomfortable, although it didn't surprise her, because their relationship could never be considered close. Even in the original novel, they never behaved as a father would. And a daughter. Suddenly, the Duke said that Everia looked good, and the girl shivered in surprise. She thought her father was implying that she looked too good for someone who had been sent here as punishment. But out loud, she said that everyone here was too kind. The Duke was very surprised by what he heard, that Everia called the Northerners good. He had never heard something like that before. Everia laughed. She thought she had the same villain face. She explained that at first things weren't as they are now. The Duke couldn't help but agree that Everia had done a great job here. Everia thought that in the letter, it seemed only the sapphire was mentioned. She asked if the Duke knew about everything that was happening in her life. The Duke replied that the barons sent him very detailed letters regularly. Everia thought that, of course, his daughter had messed up, which was why they had exiled her. So surveillance was simply necessary. The Duke realized that she herself didn't send him a single letter. So this was the only way to be able to follow his daughter's life. And that's how he found out she had a dog, although he had previously thought Everia couldn't stand it. Everything sounded like an excuse, and Everia said she understood. The Duke wanted to say something more, but then Everia saw the workshop and said they had already reached their destination. "Rishi," Everia shouted as she approached. The new workshop turned out to be a solid and spacious building with everything necessary. The Duke entered, met the blacksmith, took and examined the magic sapphire that had been created. He clarified if the stone was really made of black acacia. Rapashi confirmed that everything was correct, and then explained that making it wouldn't be difficult. You just had to be attentive to the time. The Duke placed the stone back on the table. He said that Errol was the only place in the world where black acacia grew on such a large scale. Now then, if people discovered its extraordinary properties, the world would simply be turned upside down. He asked Rapashi why he decided to tell him. The blacksmith replied that he simply trusted Everia, and that he sincerely believed Everia wouldn't use that knowledge for selfish purposes. The Duke was surprised to discover that someone completely trusted his daughter. Rapashi confirmed that it wasn't just her, but his whole village. He wanted to tell him that it was the relic they were guarding. Everia didn't let him say it out loud. She interrupted Rapashi and exclaimed that rare luck had smiled upon her. The girl hastened to say that only with the help of luck could she pass the dwarves' little test. She even turned to Rapashi to confirm her words, and the blacksmith said this could be called a test. Everia said that at least now that they knew about the magic tree, she was thinking of leaving the production to the villagers. They will receive sapphires and will be able to revive the village. The Duke noticed that it seemed Everia had become fond of the locals. He turned abruptly to look around. This whole story, which began with the Dragon Knights and now reached the sapphires. Even if this land were now inviolable due to its independence, the royal family will be on guard. So the time had come for Everia to make her final choice. She can continue hiding from everyone in the world or try to obtain extraordinary power that will help her become untouchable. The Duke looked at his daughter with a sad and serious expression. He wanted her to know that the Oberon family never gave up so easily. The Duke declared that from that day on, Everia would become the ruler of Irel. He told her to lay the foundations of Irel with her own hands and then return to the capital. He exclaimed angrily that together they would get rid of the scoundrels who dared to betray his daughter. Everia exclaimed that Baron Insisha still existed, and besides, she herself had no need for that position. The Duke replied that the Baron had already accepted everything. Everia imagined the Baron wishing her luck and thought he had just stabbed her in the back. The Duke placed his hand on Everia's shoulder and said that perhaps she couldn't do everything alone, but he would surely find a way to return his daughter to the capital. He asked her to trust him, that he would take care of everything, and Everia must prepare for her magnificent coming-of-age ceremony that will take place in the capital. That's what the Duke informed her and immediately left for the capital, saying that a lot of work had accumulated. It was a great pity that the real Everia never knew anything about the Duke's true feelings. She believed she fell so deeply in love with the Crown Prince only because she didn't receive love from her own family. The Baron turned to Everia and asked, given that the master had already left, if it was time to start. When the girl asked him what he meant, the Baron, smiling, explained what his plans were. The plans referred to the management, lessons the Baron intended to impart to Everia. Harry asked the exhausted Everia if she was okay, and the girl shouted that nothing was okay, and that she wanted to go home. The demon said with surprise that she seemed to be at home anyway, and Everia thought that Harry knew nothing about her true identity. She couldn't understand why, even after becoming Everia, she had to work all the time. The girl turned to Harry and asked him how he had managed to control himself lately. Jupiter immediately asked what it was that needed to be restrained, but Harry brusquely demanded that that pathetic sword stop interfering in conversations. In response, Jupiter stated that the demon should watch his tongue. Everia told them to stop fighting, and then explained that Harry was a demon, and that if he didn't satisfy his needs, problems could arise, and asked how much longer he could contain himself. Upon hearing about special needs, Jupiter immediately understood what she was referring to. Jupiter said that they were referring to the demon's obscene essence, demanding bloodshed, or the satisfaction of his sexual desire. Both the demon and Everia blushed at the same time at the dagger's direct words. Everia even asked what kind of sexual attraction he was talking about. Harry even shouted at Jupiter, indignant. He asked what that sacred sword was allowing itself to say. Jupiter asked in surprise, was it really some kind of secret, since he was so willing to apologize for it? Everia leaned over Harry and asked him if this was the other way besides killing. The girl sincerely asked him why he didn't use it, but Harry turned away and just muttered that it was because so. Everia nudged the demon in the shoulder and asked what he was muttering. Harry replied that people were disgusting, and that's why he didn't want to do it. Everia noted that he was now talking about the person sitting in front of him. Harry replied that she was the exception. He explained that after the contract was made, her scent was absorbed by Everia's soul, so he felt no feeling of irritation or disgust towards her. This was the privilege of his summoner. He looked into Everia's huge green eyes and said that she was the only summoner who was completely special to him. So the method the sacred sword was talking about now wasn't suitable from the beginning. Although Everia couldn't understand why, Harry exclaimed that no one would ever sleep with a creature that they found disgusting. And Everia asked him if she was an exception. Harry looked at her with a completely stunned expression on his face. The girl said there she is, Everia Oberon. She said you could do it with her. Just in case, Harry even ran to one side and shouted. The demon turned completely red and shouted that Everia was still a girl and couldn't talk about those things. Everia noted that with the arrival of her next birthday, she would become an adult. And in her past life, she had long since passed that mark. Furthermore, no one has yet been able to suggest another way. Everia asked if Harry had slept with the founder of Garant, and the demon shouted that such a thing was completely impossible. But at least with him, he didn't have to contain his bloodlust at all. Harry covered his face with his hand and groaned that, although he had felt it from the beginning, now he understood with certainty that Everia's idea about demons was a bit strange. Everia said that Harry was a demon, and demons wanted blood, murder, and sex, and at the last word, Harry simply covered her mouth with his hand. He didn't want Everia, whom he still considered a girl, to say those words. Harry said he didn't know why Everia had that idea about demons, but he had never done it even in the underworld, much less in the human world. Everia, very surprised, asked why this happened. Harry replied that he simply didn't have that interest, and that blood attracted him much more. But the demon was now very irritated by the need to discuss such things with a child. Everia approached him and asked him if that meant that if they did that, she would become his first partner. Harry asked, irritated, why she always put so much meaning into his words, especially when he had said he wouldn't do it. Everia pointed out that she had neither the time nor any other way to solve this problem. What if nothing works if they leave this method for last and Harry ends up completely losing control of himself? What if they decided to sleep together to contain Harry? He would feel disgusted by what they could do about it. Everia said that's why it's necessary to check everything in advance, at least by touching it. Harry didn't understand exactly what the girl was going to check. Everia said that if Harry was okay, they would leave this method as a last resort. Harry still didn't understand, asked how they would do it, and Everia replied like this and reached out her hand to him. Everia grabbed the demon tightly by the neck and pulled him towards her. The next moment, Everia leaned towards Harry's kiss. The demon didn't expect at all that something like this could happen suddenly. Finally, Everia pulled away and looked at Harry. The demon froze on the ground, looking completely stunned. Color completely flooded Harry's face, and he couldn't utter a word. So how is it? Everia asked excitedly, looking at the demon. She wanted to know if he disliked kissing her, because she herself thought it was fine. She explained that wouldn't happen unless Harry felt uncomfortable, and if Everia herself didn't like it, she wouldn't do it either. Harry could feel his heart beating wildly, but Everia said it was fine. The demon hastened to assure her that everything was fine with him too. Everia said that was great, so they could leave that method as a last resort. At that moment, Jupiter called Everia, and the dagger asked its owner that, if she still decided to use that method, to leave it somewhere far away. Everia said, okay, that's what she would do. In Irel, under Rapashi's leadership, large-scale sapphire production began. On the advice of Emma and the Baron, they entrusted the resin collection to women who had lost their husbands. And for production, they hired children from the orphanage. The feudal lord returned to his busy life. But amidst all this, the most important task was the creation of an idol. Everia claimed she would ensure Harry made his debut in the center. Harry didn't have the slightest idea what his summoner was saying with such enthusiasm. Everia explained that, in a few words, he would become the face of her city, and suggested that Harry would also like that. She said it must be hard for a demon to live in the form of a dog. She asked if Harry would be happy if he no longer had to become a dog. Everia planned to present Harry to everyone in human form. A loud bell sound was heard. Emma entered and asked from the door if her lady had called her. The scene Emma witnessed left her frozen on the threshold. She found her mistress sitting on the lap of a white-haired man. Emma immediately prepared to run and call the guards. The door slammed shut with a loud bang. Everia tried to explain to the maid that there had been a misunderstanding. Emma suggested that it turned out the lady had accidentally fallen into the knight's lap when she wanted to put the bell back in its place. Everia asked how Emma guessed it and why, if she had understood everything. She had called the guards. Emma replied that, after all, there was a stranger in the lady's quarters. She asked who that man was, who didn't look like a local at all, and Harry replied that they were old friends from a long time ago. Emma replied that she would never forget such a face if she had ever seen it, and Everia replied that Emma might know Harry. He was the same fairy dog that actually looked like a human. Everia wanted to introduce him formally to everyone, so she needed help. At that moment, the conversation was interrupted because the maid lost consciousness. Everia ran to Emma and asked if the girl was okay. The maid replied that she had simply suddenly been carried away by fear and felt as if her legs had given out. Emma asked how she could help the lady. Everia replied that Emma would have to confirm Harry's identity. She wanted to create a legend that he was an exceptional swordsman among the common people who who was destined to become a dragon knight. Emma said that in that case, they could tell everyone he came from an orphanage. It was unlikely anyone could dig up his past. So Harry, without much difficulty, joined the Order of Knights, who asked him if he was the ladies' guard. One of the knights looked at the newcomer with sudden sadness. This new man with an arrogant face didn't please anyone. The demon, looking at them, kicked hard a small stone that had gotten under his foot. The knights were dissatisfied because they had served their lady for much longer. And now this pretty face had appeared out of nowhere. Everia believed that Harry's presentation to the knights had gone well, since the knights responsible for security were only fulfilling their duties nominally, since times of peace had thus arrived in time. She told the demon he had done a good job, even managing to avoid conflicts. Harry turned his head as if looking for something around him. Suddenly, he got very close to Everia and loomed over her. Everia, he whispered, leaning closer to her, and said that it seemed they were there together, which meant they could talk now. Everia laughed and said that of course Harry could do that. She thanked him for listening to her request and holding back, because sometimes he says dangerous things that can attract unnecessary attention. Now it was time to choose clothes for Harry, because they decided to update the Order's uniform, since the previous one looked too ridiculous. For the new one, Everia thought carefully about every detail. She thought the new uniform would look great on Harry. Everia imagined how dazzling the demon would look in that snow-white tunic. Harry was already perfect, and if you put such a uniform on him, it would be impossible to look away. Everyone would literally come to Irel to see the Order of Knights. Everia was simply overflowing with enthusiasm. She considered all this a large-scale operation to create an idol. Everia said that, of course, Harry would be the central figure in all her plans. And the demon sighed and said that whatever amuses a child, so be it. Everia announced that she would take Harry's measurements and told him to open his arms wide. Harry reminded her that the summoner had recently measured them, and Everia seemed surprised by this reminder, but then said that one more time wouldn't hurt anyway. Harry turned abruptly to the girl and demanded that she admit that, in fact, everything was already done, and Everia smiled. He had finally seen through her tricks. With an enthusiastic smile, Everia admitted that her personal demon simply had an amazing physique. Color completely covered Harry's face. He took the girl by the waist and with effort lifted her off the ground. "Listen, summoner," he said, sitting her down in front of him. He said Everia wasn't serious, and yet he was still a demon. The girl replied that that demon protected her as if she were made of precious crystal. The demon looked at her with a long and confused look. Finally, he covered his eyes with his hand and exhaled loudly. He asked if his summoner was going to start fearing him even a little. "I'm afraid," murmured Everia, confused, looking at Harry's face. Harry got close to the girl, and their faces were at the same level. With a smile, Everia asked the demon if he was sure of what he was doing now. "Do you think it's worth it?" she said, looking him in the eyes. "Is this really what you want?" she asked as the demon approached to hug her. Everia leaned closer to Harry so she could whisper something in his ear. Harry didn't answer. He simply slid to the floor, hiding his face from Everia. "No," said Harry, still without looking at the girl. Everia laughed and said that was great, and then suggested they continue with what they were doing. Lady Everia was informed that Baron Insisha had arrived to see her, and she ordered that he be let in. The Baron handed over a sealed envelope and said that a reply had arrived for the lady from the royal family. After reading it, Everia said everything was as she expected. They were ordered to increase the volume of sapphires produced according to the prepared plan and deliver them to the capital. Suddenly, Everia noticed that the Baron was looking at her too closely and asked why. The Baron said that the lady had managed to face an extremely difficult matter with such ease. Everia said that, frankly, there was still a bit of doubt. When the Baron left, Harry asked Everia what was wrong. Everia asked if he was referring to the letter and the discussion of the situation regarding the sale of the sapphires. There is only one deposit of this stone in the country, and Count Nada had the monopoly on its exploitation. That's why, in the first place, they informed him about the successful creation of sapphires. But he, of course, categorically forbade their sale and demanded that they sell the stones to him. After being betrayed by the crown prince, Everia, heartbroken, was left with no way to earn money. And who would have thought that her closest neighbor would be the enemy kingdom of Lune? Now Everia was considering whether to enter into a supply agreement with them. They sent a letter of similar content to the royal family, which in turn had no choice but to accept it. And this letter was the permission to sell the Irel stone. But in exchange for the agreement, Everia will be obliged to supply the royal family with an impressive amount of sapphires for free. Harry asked her if she was really going to do that, and Everia said of course not. However, the royal family has the means to insist on its own way. They could declare Everia a traitor and send an army after her, and the neighboring empire would take advantage of this to occupy Irel. It is unlikely they would want to worsen the situation before the war without at least making a good proposal on their part. Everia asked if she could count on Harry if anything went wrong. The demon, with an anticipating smile, declared that he simply adored war. Everia sighed deeply and said that they had finally resolved it. Now it was necessary to negotiate with the Magicians' Association. They have a high demand for the magic stone, as they are dedicated to the production of magic artifacts. So the magicians are important potential buyers. It is also necessary to increase the sapphire production volume. The plan was to create hot springs for travelers. Then it was necessary to supply all the knights with equipment. Everia simply imagined all this and couldn't contain a groan. It was too difficult to attract travelers to the city. Harry asked in surprise if the summoner hadn't dealt exclusively with sapphires. Everia gestured with her hand and said that if you want to live, you need to know how to spin. Everia said they had money now. The problem with the wyverns was also solved. Harry confirmed that she had worked hard. Some time passed. The first armor for dragon riders was completely ready. Everia thought that if she dressed the knights in new uniforms, everyone would be absolutely delighted. Rapashi asked Everia what she thought of all that. Everia said it was absolutely incredible. Thanks to Jupiter, the knights' skills improved significantly, and Sir Lionel became the most outstanding among them. Everia believed that perhaps her purpose as the bearer of the sacred sword was precisely to seek out hidden talents. Jupiter opposed this, saying that it had originally chosen Everia because she had no particular goals. Everia had obtained it without any selfish motive. In fact, she had thought it was some kind of old junk, and Jupiter believed that this was the first time in its life it had met such a person. It was not for revenge, power, or glory that Everia took the dagger for herself. She was not motivated by any of the above, so Jupiter sincerely believed that the new mistress would use it for the common good. Everia was surprised that Jupiter could speak like an authentic sacred sword. Jupiter said that the lady seemed to have forgotten that it was the true sacred sword. Everia laughed, attracting the knight's attention. Everia told Harry that she thought they would soon be able to introduce the dragon knights to everyone. Suddenly, an idea came to her head, and she called the demon. Everia ordered Harry to train the children in her place, and Jupiter was supposed to help him. This caused indignation in both the dagger and the demon. Jupiter simply couldn't believe that its mistress would hand it over so easily into the hands of this demon. Everia explained that now she was responsible for the northern lands, so she didn't have a free minute. But she couldn't take Jupiter and entrust it to a stranger. Everia also believed that they would have the opportunity to become friends. But both the demon and the dagger unanimously declared that nothing would work. And this wouldn't happen. Meanwhile, in Count Nat's castle, a powerful fist slammed into the table, and the Count roared that this girl had crossed all boundaries in her insolence. The Count, with a reddened face, wanted to hear one more time how much she was selling the sapphire for. He was literally trembling with anger. The assistant told him it was 10% lower than his own cost, and that the price would also be reduced if a long-term contract was signed. All this meant that Nat's supplies to the Magicians' Association would be drastically reduced. For a few pennies, the Count's voice cracked. In the letter, this Everia tried to seem very polite, but now she decided to stab him in the back. She also secured the support of the royal family. Looking at Count Nat, his assistant was clearly quite scared. A moment later, a crash was heard. Something shattered. The aide tried in vain to persuade His Excellency to calm down. The Count shouted that Everia Oberon wouldn't get away with all this. At that moment, Everia yawned and thought that what was happening was simply deadly boring. Guests began to arrive at the reception to celebrate the debut of the Dragon Knights. The main topic of discussion among the local aristocracy invited to the celebration was Irel. Everia walked past the window, paying attention to the noise and hustle and bustle of the crowd in the street. Everia asked if the Sapphire twins were ready. It was a chest full of precious and shiny objects. The Baron said there should be enough for all the guests, and they were also imbued with purity magic. Everia said that by distributing the stones among the guests, they would create a public outcry. And then the nobles from the capital would immediately begin to flock to Irel to keep up with fashion trends. The Baron asked if Lady Evria wanted to send the invitations herself, but she replied that, given her reputation, her direct approach would only achieve disastrous results. Evria saw that the Baron wanted to say something else and asked about it. The Baron said that among those present would also be Count Nada. Evria said she had thought he would refuse the invitation, but he seemed to be in serious trouble. Since the Baron realized that the Count's fortune was at stake, he even suggested increasing surveillance on him, but Evria said it wasn't worth it. Since he had already arrived, there was nothing that could be done about it. The Baron also reported that they had discovered a fairly large hot spring, but its location left much to be desired. Evria asked where exactly it was located, since they should first start exploiting it, and let the geologists continue their search. A knock was heard at the door, and Evria allowed the maid to enter. Emma came to inform the lady that it was time to start preparations. Evria told the Baron they could finish their conversation after the reception. Evria wondered how long this would take. Emma was so eager to urge her to hurry. Harry, in human form, has already tried his new dragon rider form. Dressed in dazzling and bright white clothes, the demon waited for his summoner. "Evria, I'm here," he said out loud, attracting the attention of the girl who was standing at the very top of the stairs. Harry turned around quickly. His heart beat faster because of what he saw. Evria had a different hairstyle, decorated with flowers, which made her look completely different. In a snow-white dress, the girl looked like an incredible vision. Evria approached him and asked in surprise what was wrong. The demon replied that she simply looked different today. Evria nodded with a smile, as it was the first time Harry had seen her in that outfit. Emma, according to Evria, had outdone herself today, so it was no surprise that Evria wasn't immediately recognizable today. Harry replied that his summoner was still the same and didn't smell bad. Evria exclaimed that in such a situation it was usually customary to give a compliment. Emma supported the lady, even getting angry at the rude fairy dog. Harry's face darkened, and he became thoughtful. Finally, Harry said that Evria was beautiful. Then he added that he said this not only because she had literally asked for compliments, but because he really thought so. Evria smiled and said Harry learned fast. The demon said he was actually telling the truth. With a laugh, Evria turned and hurried towards the exit, because they must already be waiting for them. Harry called her. It turned out that in the heat of the moment, he was heading in the completely wrong direction. Where the celebration was held, it turned out quite noisy. So many people, so much conversation. Evria greeted the guests, waving to some and having others introduced to her. "Evria Oberon," a voice was heard, making the girl turn sharply. Count Nada said he felt very flattered by the invitation he received, and that he hoped to get to know her. Evria thought that this man perfectly embodied his position as Margrave, as vast as his powers. She said she was happy to see him and gave her name. She admitted she thought that due to his constant work, the Count wouldn't be able to attend the reception. She expressed her gratitude to the Count for honoring them with his presence. The Count said the older generation has a responsibility to support young people in their business endeavors. Everia's and the Count's gazes met, and sparks of lightning flashed between them. Everia exclaimed that there could be no division between generations in matters of trade after all. They weren't living in the Stone Age. Seeing that the Count was indignant at her words, the young lady hastened to assure him that she was only joking, and that there was no reason to be angry with her. It was time for Everia to begin the ceremony, so she was forced to say goodbye. Everia thanked the dear guests for their participation and indicated to them that they had been waiting for a long time. She said there was no point in delaying it any longer. It was time to start, so she was going to introduce everyone to the new Irel pack. "Dragon Order," Evria declared out loud, raising her hand to the sky. The wyverns of a special squadron flew over the heads of Everia and the spectators. People threw their heads back and watched this incredible flight. Everia stood there and admired how everything was going according to her plan. The spectacular entrance was livened up by an aerial confrontation between Harry and Lionel. The staged duel ended with Harry's triumphant victory, his face absolutely dazzling in the very center of the events. Everia applauded with joy and thought that the Dragon Knights were the highlight of today's program. Suddenly, she saw something happening that she didn't expect. Everia didn't understand why everyone was heading towards her. "My lady," was heard in the general bustle. "We, the Knights of the Dragon Order," resonated before the gathered crowd. All the knights wanted to take the oath of loyalty. The knights extended their weapons and addressed Everia. They asked the lady to accept their oath, and Everia, in a panic, thought she didn't want to do it at all. The guests commented on the magnificent reception, which turned out to be like a fairy tale. Everyone, especially, enjoyed the spectacular end of the whole performance. Lady Everia took the oath, and now everyone was saying that they couldn't imagine that Lady Everia, or Everia, would be so prudent and beautiful. All these words were repeated to Everia, and she only asked if everyone really said that. Harry said everything had gone well, but couldn't understand why the summoner had suddenly become so sad. Everia was absolutely horrified and told the demon. Originally, she had planned to simply have fun and relax more. She exclaimed that with all those vows, orders of chivalry, now she was responsible for other people's lives. And this was a heavy burden. Suddenly, one of the knights walked towards them and called Sir Harry. Everia told the demon to leave and said she was going to suffer a little more. Harry said the knights themselves wanted to make this oath to her, so she was getting herself completely tangled for nothing. Then he asked her to always carry Jupiter with her, especially if Harry himself suddenly wasn't by her side. Everia sighed and said that anyway she had already taken the oath, so he could leave. Left alone, Everia sighed again, this time with some relief. Okay, work doesn't wait, the girl said out loud, cheering herself up. She urgently needed to resolve something else. The girl was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't immediately notice a dark figure approaching her. But finally she could see this man, and she shivered in surprise. It was Count Nat, and the expression on his face was quite sinister. The next moment there was a loud bang, after which the light for Everia went out. She woke up after a long time with a terrible headache. Feeling weak and dizzy, Everia tried to remember what had happened to her. She found that her feet, inside her elegant shoes, were chained, producing a monstrous metallic sound. It was dark, and the dusty corners of the room were covered in cobwebs. Everia realized that it was Count Nat who had kidnapped her from her own property. She thought this old man had completely lost his mind. Her head was still spinning, so much so that Everia even suspected she had a concussion. "She's awake, my lady," a familiar, resounding voice echoed. Everia hastened to ask Jupiter what had happened, but the dagger indicated to her that, apparently, the lady was in the dungeon of Count Nat's castle. He first stunned the girl, and then used the magic stone's power and moved her here, said Jupiter. Everia begged him to be silent for at least a minute, as she didn't feel well. Jupiter offered to help and heal the lady. Everia had never imagined that the sword could heal before. It was the first time she had heard of such a thing, and she had previously assumed that Jupiter was nothing more than a talking piece of metal. But now it explained to her that it had more than 1,000 skills, although the most mind-blowing property of the dagger was considered to be its blinding glow, with whose help any appearance became truly spectacular. Everia laughed and said it was truly amazing, but now she would like to ask it to heal her. Jupiter replied that it couldn't do that, and Everia was surprised, since just a moment ago it had claimed exactly the opposite. The sword replied that for that it had to be in the lady's hands, but it was taken away during the search. Everia checked. Yes, indeed, the dagger was nowhere to be found. She asked anxiously where it was now. Jupiter replied that now it was the prison director's responsibility, as he had decided to appropriate such a good sword under the cover of the situation. Everia said not everything was that bad, and then asked if Jupiter had any ideas. The dagger suggested summoning that demon, since the summoner is capable of establishing a connection at any distance. It seemed like the right idea, and Everia began to yell for Harry, and the demon responded immediately. With a laugh she asked if the demon was very worried. He asked her if she was mocking him. He assumed that this could only be the work of that bastard, Nat. Harry needed to know where Everia was now, and he would come immediately. Everia looked around again and admitted honestly that she was somewhere there, but she didn't know exactly where that place was located. There was absolutely no sign that Everia could call his attention to. She asked if Harry could teleport there. Harry asked what Evria's dagger was doing now, and the girl replied that it had been taken from her while she was unconscious. She ordered him first to track the location of the Count, and then they could find her. And if he discovered anything, he would communicate with her immediately. Everia was left alone, and thought that the darkness made her feel downcast. Then she thought about what would happen if Harry still couldn't find her. For some reason, she imagined the demon rejoicing when he found himself under the control of another summoner. Because with his new master, he could finally spill rivers of blood. Everia shook her head, trying to clear the unwanted vision. She tried to convince herself that Harry didn't think that way, that he even seemed worried about her. If she remembered how his voice sounded, she imagined Harry and how his voice usually sounded when he said her name. The door creaked, and the sound of footsteps was heard. "You're awake, darling," said the Count, who appeared in the cell. "Count," shouted Evria, jumping to her feet. The girl's head spun from the sudden movement, and she almost fell. And she was faking it. The Count snorted with disdain, looking at her. Evria snorted, and said that now she sees how the older generation behaves with the younger one. The Count noted that the girl kept answering sharply, and said that it would be extremely difficult for her to conduct her business if she didn't learn to assess the situation with sensibleness. The Count said that only the owner and the heir knew about this place, and Evria only had two options. She could die from torture, or hand over all the sapphires to the Count. By signing the contract prepared by the Count, Evria commits to supplying him with Haralano sapphire for 500 years. The Count said Evria didn't have to worry, as he would pay for the sapphires, with the purchase price being 10% of their real value. Evria replied that she thought Count Nat's cook would be very upset. After all, with this same mouth, the Count eats exquisite food, and then disgusting garbage comes out of it. Count Nat said he felt Evria still didn't understand the difficult situation she was in. He turned around and said that a short hunger strike would loosen her tongue. The door slammed shut, and Evria was left alone again, wondering what she should do now. The full moon rose in the sky. It was already midnight. On the table was a diagram of Count Nat's castle spread out. The Baron, who was studying it, ordered that the general plan also be brought to him. Harry thought sadly that he didn't understand his actions' motives at all. But if it helped find his summoner, then he didn't care about those same motives. He wanted the head of the Information Guild to show what he was capable of. Harry closed his eyes and mentally called for Evria. And at that moment, when the woman finally decided to take revenge, he pronounced clear and loud Evria and went silent. His listener began to yell at him to continue. He didn't understand why she interrupted his story. The guard and Jupiter demanded to know more. They wanted to know if the son-in-law had seen his niece. Evria thought she hadn't even imagined it would work like that. A little earlier she asked Jupiter how many people were outside. The dagger replied that there was a guardian and another prisoner. Evria was surprised that there was someone else there besides her, as if the Count had a mania for locking people in prison. She also felt how the loneliness simply began to weigh on her psyche. She slumped to the floor of the cell and howled, and then began to yell about the bathroom. She yelled to be let at least go to the bathroom. She needed to at least scream out of anguish. In this way, she wanted to create a noise attack, but her enthusiasm quickly faded. At first, Evria only wanted to create a noise attack, but her enthusiasm quickly faded. And then she decided to tell an intriguing story. Who would have thought that she would captivate both the sacred sword and the supervisor himself with her story? Who enthusiastically would ask questions about what happened next? Excellent, thought Evria. Now it's time to play the drama queen. Evria exclaimed that her throat was so dry she feared she wouldn't be able to continue. She simply needed at least a sip of water. The guardian hesitated, as he wasn't supposed to do that, but Evria said that since she had no other options, she would simply lie down and rest. But it would have been possible to give her a little water, because it would have been very interesting to know how it would end. The guardian swallowed and thought. A creaking of a door opening was heard. The guardian entered, and Evria thanked him, but said she no longer had strength. So she asked him to come closer. A bright flash marked Jupiter's brilliant appearance. Evria took her dagger, slammed the door shut, and ordered Jupiter to relieve her dizziness. Jupiter asked if the lady didn't want to be completely healed. Evria replied that then suspicions might arise, since she was imprisoned. Sorry you managed to escape. A completely unknown voice sounded suddenly. When Evria froze, the voice asked her if she could free him too. The door opened with a creak, and a barefoot prisoner appeared from it. He was ragged and unshaven. He leaned against the wall and said a big thank you. Evria asked him how long he had been there, and he replied that, if he wasn't mistaken, about 6 years. Evria was shocked by this period of time, and then asked what happened. The prisoner replied that he didn't even have time to come to his senses before finding himself there. He said that his father was the former Count of Nat, but his uncle killed him and took his title for himself. Evria said she was very sorry, and the stranger thanked her. He said that in any case, he could help the girl get out of there. After all, during his training for the role of successor, he learned about a secret exit. It was the secret exit map that was now revealed to the other viewers. They discussed that that passage led directly to the Count's castle, and that they would use it to enter and start their search. Luke, who was speaking covertly, thought he had broken his own guild's rules for the first time, and leaked information during his transformation. When he took the Baron's form, he just wanted to see the Dragon Knights. But this woman offered a reward and asked if they would accept checks as payment for the information. That was enough, and now he said that a small group should go and asked if there were volunteers for this. Harry appeared suddenly and declared that he would go alone. Luke looked at the knight and said he understood his condition, but didn't think it was necessary for him to go there alone. He looked at the knight thoughtfully. The demon replied that everyone else would only get in his way. Soon the wyvern with the rider on its back rose into the night sky to meet the full moon. Luke, still with his fake disguise, watched the flight from the window and thought that Everia clearly had her own personal knight, and this man was clearly as strange as Lady Everia herself. "Well," said Luke, turning abruptly, "it's time for me to return." At that moment, Everia and her new companion were walking down a long corridor. The girl asked the stranger if he thought the Count would find out about their escape. The stranger replied that he wouldn't know anything until tomorrow, and then he would decide that they had used the stairs, since this secret exit was only shown to worthy successors. "Thank God," said Everia, already exhausted by such a long walk. Then she asked why the Count had kept that man in captivity for 6 whole years. The stranger replied that before he died, his father told him that he had discovered another deposit of magic stones. However, he never managed to publicly announce his discovery. Everia turned around. The mention of another deposit intrigued her. The stranger confirmed that only he and his father knew of its existence. Everia thought about what he had told her. She asked her companion what he was going to do after escaping. "Revenge," the ex-prisoner replied sadly. He intended to reclaim the place that by right belonged to him. Both understood that it wouldn't be easy. Everia turned abruptly and extended her hand towards the stranger. She said it seemed they had never met, that her name was Everia Oberon. She was the ruler of Irel, and that he could count on her support with total confidence. Everia assured him that appearances are deceptive, but in reality she is very capable. She herself needed to return the stranger to his uncle, Count Nat. The stranger looked at Everia from under the long, tangled hair that fell over his face. He took Everia's hand and shook it. He really wanted to thank the girl for the offer. The stranger admitted that even after leaving the cell, he believed that everything was already lost for him. But Everia managed to instill hope in him. He was grateful and said he wouldn't remain in debt. Everia asked the stranger to promise her one thing in return. After he managed to take possession of the deposit, he would exclude the Crown Prince from the list of potential partners. Potential. The stranger was surprised that she suddenly had something against the Crown Prince. Everia said sadly it was a long story, and at that moment a loud sound was heard. Everia turned quickly to see what was there. Everia became cautious and asked the stranger if he hadn't said the Count didn't know about that tunnel. The stranger assured that that was the case at least 6 years ago, before his imprisonment, and yet they were definitely sounds of footsteps. They were clearly approaching. Someone was going down the steps of the spiral staircase. Everia ordered Jupiter to prepare the brightest glow. It was convenient to hide from prying eyes behind the edge of the wall. "Now," shouted Everia, raising Jupiter above her head. And at that moment, someone cursed her. This voice seemed very familiar to the girl. She clearly recognized who was speaking to her. "Harry," shouted Everia, opening her eyes. It was indeed the demon in his new snow-white form. He looked very attentively at the summoner sitting in front of him. Everia suddenly lost her last strength and declared that he had scared her a lot. Harry ran to the girl and examined her. Then he asked if she was hurt and what had happened to her face. Everia exclaimed that it was the Count. He had gone completely crazy. She breathed deeply to tell Harry everything that had happened to her during this time. She began to complain that Count Nat had kidnapped her and locked her in a dungeon. As that could be possible, she showed the demon how badly she was hurt. Harry said he would simply finish him off, but Everia objected that that couldn't be done. The demon took the girl in his arms, and she asked the stranger if he was sure he could get there on his own. The stranger replied resolutely that it would be better for him to go alone. That was safer. The demon became sad and angry, and Everia said she would wait. She assured him that her offer still stood and that he could find her in Irel. But for some reason, the demon was indignant about all this. "Who are we waiting for?" he shouted, and they disappeared in a column of radiance. The stranger remained standing, alone in the corridor. After her terrible experience, Evria decided to take a short vacation and relax. Embracing Harry, who had taken the form of a dog, the girl lay on the sofa with a book. She looked with interest at the face of the dog that was by her side Harry, who hadn't closed his eyes for a minute during her confinement. Now he was dozing sweetly nearby, and at some point, Everia simply kissed him. Harry asked her in shock what she was doing, and the girl laughed in response. She said she was in a very good mood. "My lady, you have a visitor," Evria was informed. At the end of her vacation, a long-awaited guest arrived. The young man said it turned out Everia was a quite famous person. Everia said that, without her mustache, she became quite difficult to recognize. Brian, together with 5 dragon knights, set off for the Count's domain. And soon the whole world found out about the atrocities committed by Count Nat. The former prisoner told his brother he wouldn't kill him. However, he intended to make him experience on his own skin what innocent people had suffered because of him. After which the Count was locked in the dungeon he had previously used with such pleasure. And nobody paid attention to the Count's screams to be released immediately. Finally, Brian took his rightful place, and Everia and Count Nat decided to work together to produce Sapphire and sell it at a reasonable price. This took place in the capital of the Kingdom of Garant, at the Oberon family estate. The 3 were sitting at the ceremoniously prepared dining table. Only the clinking of cutlery could be heard. Duke Oberon realized that Everia had come a long way. Marquis Archibald, Everia's older brother, commented that he had heard his sister had suffered problems. Everia replied that everything was fine now, so there was no need to worry. Archibald said he thanked heaven for that. The Count remained silent, but his face was very expressive at that moment. Archibald continued his meal as if nothing had happened. In the silence, the only sound that could be heard was the clinking of forks, and Evria thought that her relatives were simply mocking her. The girl could clearly see genuine concern on their faces. She didn't understand at all why they had called her so early, if she had so much to do. Some time after the kidnapping, Evria received a letter. The Baron informed her that the Duke urgently called her to the capital. There were still 2 months left until her birthday, and she thought the celebration could take place in Irel. The Baron said she was obligated to attend her coming-of-age celebration. And besides, the Duke was calling her because he was worried. The Baron has volunteered to settle her affairs for now, and she will go to do what she knows best. Evria asked cautiously what she was supposed to do. The sale of the sapphire, the Baron stated confidently. After all, it was absolutely necessary to attract potential buyers among the nobles. At that moment, Everia had believed him, but now she believed the Duke hadn't summoned her because he was consumed by his emotions. While thinking about this, lying in bed, a sound caught her attention. Of course, it was Harry who wanted to know how lunch had gone. Evria realized he couldn't come into her bedroom, and the demon asked her why. Evria explained that there were already some bad rumors surrounding her name. If she locks herself in her chambers with a handsome knight, the conversations will simply never end. Harry claimed that it didn't matter what others thought or said, but Everia didn't want to get caught up in ridiculous gossip. If such rumors circulate about a girl, then all kinds of people start saying nonsense. Harry replied that then he would simply rip their balls off, which was a perfectly good idea. The demon was quite proud of himself, and Everia asked him how he was doing containing his demonic thirst. It has been quite a while since the Wyvern House. Harry was surprised at first, but then said that indeed it was like that. The demon noted with surprise that everything was fine with him, but he didn't understand why this was happening. Everia said she simply thought he was being patient. Harry shouted that it wasn't like that, because if he held back for too long, his body would stop listening to him completely, and he hated when that happened. Everia thought that it was as if the demonic thirst had simply diminished a little. She suggested that it might have been because of that kiss, but the demon replied that such a small thing shouldn't have caused such changes. Everia didn't like the word. She didn't think it was something small, but then Harry said it was the best kiss of all time. He said that maybe the demon had managed to find another way, and then suggested that since he was on the topic, he could charge him. Harry didn't understand very well what it was she was going to do. Everia said she was suggesting charging him, which is what you do when you run out of energy. After all, it could happen that a similar kidnapping situation arises again, and Harry doesn't have energy. Then Everia grabbed the demon by the shoulders with determination. The girl stated that Harry's supplies had to be replenished as often as possible. She leaned towards the demon with evident intention. "It's a good idea," Harry replied and also leaned towards the girl. A moment later, they merged into a long, passionate kiss. Unable to stay on their feet, they collapsed on the bed. "And well?" Everia asked, looking at Harry. "I don't know yet," Harry replied, clearly intending to repeat it. He was now firmly convinced that she was giving him energy. Everia said she was incredibly happy that he turned out to be such an innocent demon. Everia thought that this type of exercise was also having a good effect on her. At that moment, a delicate cough was heard. Jupiter said that the knight seemed to have completely forgotten that it was actually there too. Harry shouted that, of course, it was definitely necessary to remind the damn thing of its presence. And Jupiter asked to simply take it away next time. "My lady, she is Emma." A voice was heard from behind the closed door, and Evria gave permission to enter. The maid arrived with the message that several reception invitations had arrived, and Everia had ordered them to be rejected. She said that due to her scandalous reputation, she would have to leave the capital before coming of age to be able to tell everyone. But in reality, she simply felt more comfortable at home. But Emma seemed a little hesitant when she heard all this. She explained that among these invitations, there is one from the royal palace. The accused, Everia Oberon, rang out in a thundering voice throughout the courtroom and announced that she had been sentenced to death. "For what?" squealed Everia. A document appeared in front of her, and she was asked if it could refresh her memory. Everia didn't have the slightest idea what it was. "Your Majesty, I hope you are in good health. You must already know of my desire to start selling the Irel sapphire," she stated. Then she wrote that she had encountered annoying obstacles along the way, and that's why she was thinking of supplying it to a neighboring state. But she trusted Your Majesty's wise decision. Everia sent a letter of similar content to the king, and Everia thought then that she would like not to have to return to the capital under any circumstances. But she still hadn't come to understand it, so she got into the carriage and headed there. "Everia Oberon greets Your Majesty, the flame of Geraint," she said upon arrival. The king laughed and said there was no need to worry, that he only wanted to see Everia. So he extended an informal invitation. The girl found it easy to tell him not to worry. The king remembered that Everia was the one who initiated the breakup of the engagement with the crown prince, and he asked her why she decided to suddenly renounce the title of queen. Everia explained to His Majesty, with a smile, that her past actions were motivated by her strong love for Cassian. But now everything had changed, and now she was no longer tempted by wars for the throne. The king said his son had acted rashly by desecrating the sanctity of marriage by having an affair, and the king himself was truly sorry that things had turned out that way. Everia replied that everything was fine, only the human soul was very fickle and unpredictable. A small wave from the north turned into a tsunami and reached the capital. The king asked if this was what Everia really wanted. The girl thought the vile old man had finally shown his true face. She said she didn't want to be lacking anything. That was all. Everia apologized for the threatening letter. She had acted solely in the interest of Irel, wanting to bring welfare and prosperity to the northern lands, which is why she desperately needed to sell the sapphires. The girl admitted with a smile that she naively believed she would never see Your Majesty again. But life sometimes brings surprises. She assured that there would be no more threatening letters. The king noted, with a chuckle, that Lady Oberon turned out to be more interesting than he had thought previously. Returning to her room, Everia simply collapsed on her bed, exhausted, ignoring Harry's gaze. Then she exclaimed that she was unbearably annoyed by that annoying, wrinkled old man. Everia looked at Harry, and the demon asked her what he should do. The summoner just had to say. A moment later, he took the form of a white dog so that Everia could hold his paws. He asked her if that really was enough for her, and the girl replied that animal therapy was just what the doctor had ordered. This crowned hypocrite simply twisted Evria's nerves into a tense spring one, and again, constantly jumping from one topic to another. During her stay at the company, these clients were the most annoying. That's why it was so difficult for her to control herself during the conversation with the king. Harry suggested getting rid of him. Everia replied that that would be a true betrayal, and then Harry said he would simply kill them all, and that the summoner would become queen. Everia said that this is exactly what she least desires. By the way, she suddenly remembered that someone had attacked Count Nat and apparently broken all his vertebrae. She wasn't the only one who wanted revenge on him. Everia looked at Harry with suspicion, and he declared that the Count deserved it. The girl looked him in the eyes even more closely. She understood what kind of devilish creature had turned Count Nat into a living corpse. That's why the demon had been so calm these days. It wasn't at all because of the energy he was charging through the kiss. Evria closed her eyes and exclaimed that something had to be done about it. No, Harry replied, and she looked at him again. The demon bowed his head under her gaze, hiding his face. Evria saw him blush and clench his teeth. For a moment, there was silence between the speakers in the room. Evria asked if Harry was angry. She reached out to touch his hair, but she flinched. The demon backed away and fell onto the bed. He became a white dog again and asked her why she was afraid of him, since he was her dog and had never bitten her before. Evria replied that she knew that. She was only a little scared, but Harry stated confidently that she was lying. The demon turned around and buried his nose in his own tail. Evria asked cautiously why she should be afraid of him. Beware of the demon, who is now angry because he is feared. Evria leaned over Harry and tried to wake him up. She said he had sworn that he would never hurt his summoner, and she believed him. Evria hugged Harry and said she really had no other choice, since she was only a weak human compared to the great demon. She asked him if he was willing to put up with her, and Harry replied that she was still very strange. He said that Count Nat had offended Evria, so the demon wasn't driven by the desire to kill or have fun, he simply wanted to punish the summoner's offender. That was it, said Evria, and asked for forgiveness for having misunderstood everything. Harry replied that since now she already knew everything, then everything was fine. The white dog curled into a ball again and let out a whining sound. Then he turned and pressed himself against Evria. The girl looked at his satisfied face and smiled. She thought he was like a nanny, although no, he was more like a trainer. They sat together on Evria's large bed. "My lady," a voice came from behind the closed door. The maid announced that the prince had arrived. Evria asked in surprise if it was Prince Lidon. She didn't understand what he could have forgotten there. Maybe he found out about the story of the check that became the payment for Luke for finding the dwarves' village. Luke, with a sinister laugh, declared that he would wisely manage Evria's money, or Evria's, and promised to spend every last cent. But it was irritating that the prince decided to return that money, even after finding out who it had gone to. It was a very petty stinginess. "How much do I owe you?" shouted Evria, opening the living room door with a wide gesture. The prince sat near the tea table and looked thoughtfully ahead. He asked, bewildered, what Evria was talking about. The girl told him not to pretend he didn't understand what was being discussed, because the prince had come to accuse her of embezzling his fortune. Then it was Lidon's account, the guest asked, and then said he should have immediately suspected something was wrong when Evria simply handed him a check-in. Blank, Evria looked at him, realizing the situation, which now looked completely different from what it had seemed to her at first. She finally realized what was happening and couldn't help letting out a shout of anger. "Luke!" she yelled, pointing at the guest in an impolite manner, and he didn't deny it. Evria asked him if he was afraid of being arrested for taking the appearance of a prince in the capital. But Luke thought it was silly, but said he didn't expect such treachery from Evria, because it turned out that all this time he had been spending Lidon's money. Evria replied that the prince had personally handed her the check, so the money belonged to her by right. Luke said that was her attitude, but he even worked overtime like a complete idiot. Evria wondered where he had managed to recycle it, and then remembered a few details. She thanked Luke from the bottom of her heart, because it was his intervention that helped her get out of there safe. In sound, Luke said that from now on the calculations should be as transparent as possible. "Anyway," he said, and Evria looked at him questioningly. The gazes of Evria and her guest met. Evria remained silent and didn't tell him anything. Luke exhaled. It seemed he had seen and said what he wanted. "You seem to be okay," he said aloud, scratching the back of his head. He headed for the door, and Evria asked him why he was leaving already. Luke replied that he hadn't spent it all yet. He turned around and advised me that next time I should be careful with my head. There would always be many enemies around. Evria thought Luke should have taken better care of himself, but he had already left. Evria crossed her arms over her chest and wondered aloud what had happened to him. Since Evria constantly rejected invitations to receptions, she had some free time, which she decided to spend getting to know the picturesque surroundings of the capital. To develop a successful business, it's simply necessary to know the latest fashion trends. After spinning in front of the mirror, Evria asked Emma what she would say to that. She put on a hooded cloak and said no one would guess now that she was Evria Oberon. Evria looked at Emma, wanting the maid to confirm it. Emma thought the fairy dog would handle everything perfectly for her mistress, and so she exclaimed that she looked wonderful. Together with Harry, they went out into the city streets. Here the owner sold cakes she had baked that same morning, and the client asked for a small discount on the price if she bought 3 at once. The saleswoman tried to object that in that case, she wouldn't have anything left for herself. And at that very moment, both citizens saw both of them walking down the stairs that led to the counters. The man had short, dazzling white hair and drew attention. He was simply an incredibly handsome man. Everia saw this exaggerated reaction from the crowd and realized the mistake she had made. She had completely forgotten something, and now she was suffering, and Harry couldn't understand what had happened. But now it became clear why Emma was looking at her so strangely. Everia herself had become so accustomed to Harry's face that she didn't even think about it. Now all she could do was sigh over the fact that this demon had been born being so cute. Everia said she was going to look around silently and discreetly, but Harry reminded her of a nobleman who had run away from the property. Harry replied that before he thought, the summoner was delighted with his face. The demon asked when did she stop liking his impressive appearance. Everia replied that she liked it very much, but now she had no choice but to pretend to be the servant of a noble knight. While all eyes were on Harry, she could look around calmly. Everia went to examine the goods on the shelves, the shiny jewels and perfume bottles. There were quite a few people. People were moving between the rows, choosing what interested them most. The prices in the capital turned out to be really exorbitant, 10 times higher than in Irel. Or more. Everia said with satisfaction that now at least she understood the true state of things. Everia, said Harry, covering his mouth with his hand, and admitted he was going to vomit. Harry, the girl turned to the demon with concern. She suddenly remembered that he felt disgust towards people. He asked for forgiveness. He hadn't thought about that at all. Harry staggered, but said he was fine and that if Everia wanted to look around, she could do it. Everia grabbed the demon to prevent him from falling. He didn't seem to be okay at all, and Everia hugged Harry, offering him an arm to support him. It was necessary to find some deserted place. Harry didn't argue, and the girl turned her head, looking around, searching for some place to go. Everywhere there was a bustling crowd, noise and bustle. Harry and Everia moved away from the busiest streets, but still found themselves in the omnipresent bustle. Everia continued to hug Harry. He pressed his palm against his face. Everia said he still seemed extremely ill. The demon replied that he simply hadn't been in the middle of a crowd for a long time. Everia expressed her regret that the demon hadn't told her about this problem, because then she would have simply taken someone else with her. Harry claimed that was the reason he didn't. He said he thought he would feel better if Everia hugged him like she did last time, because he needed her scent. Everia took a step towards him to do him a favor. "We can live," said the demon, hugging the girl tightly. And then he added that he absolutely needed it. "Do you feel better?" Everia asked after a while. She opened her arms and told the demon to wait for her there. Harry asked her why and where she was going. Everia was going to buy him something to drink, but Harry said they would go together. Everia stroked him and told him there were a lot of people there, so it would be better if the demon waited there, and she would just go buy something really refreshing. She promised she would return immediately, and Harry stayed anyway. Everia managed to get 2 glasses of water with lemon, ice, and mint. But for some reason, the merchant bowed deeply to her and was trembling all over. Everia walked down the street and heard a child cry in fear. She thought her villain face was to blame again. Before even reaching the place where she left Harry, Everia saw something. A man approached Harry and asked if everything was okay, since he looked so bad. Everia didn't really understand what was happening there. A girl with a cloak and hood told Harry that she would call a doctor, that there was no need to worry, that she wasn't crazy. She touched the demon and said she only wanted to help. "Don't touch me," Harry growled almost angrily. Everia barely had time to intervene and ask what had happened. "Harry," Harry shouted, and the stranger in the cloak repeated the name. He laughed and said he could help Everia if she was having a hard time. Everia handed the demon one of the glasses she had brought and said there was no need for a healer, that she and this man were together, and Harry whispered to her that he had said they should go together. And at that moment, Everia let out a gasp of surprise. She recognized the stranger. It turned out that it was Catherine Utberson herself, the protagonist of the novel, who managed to identify Everia Oberon. Everia didn't understand what the main character was doing here. Catherine said she had heard that Lady Everia had arrived in the kingdom, but she still didn't expect to find her here. Catherine said she was just passing by and saw that man wasn't feeling well. And it turned out that it was Lady Everia Oberon's companion. Everia said it was time to leave, and she waved goodbye, only for Lady Catherine to shout for them to wait. Catherine assumed she had interrupted them. Interrupted? Everia Oberon? Suddenly, a loud shout was heard, and the man who was standing at the end of the street ordered her to immediately stay away from her. Everia sighed, realizing that that man was also there, as if everyone had gathered here. Cashin, you have understood everything wrong, shouted Catherine. The prince ran towards his beloved. He asked her if she was okay, and what bad thing this woman had done to her again. Cashin turned to Everia and shouted that this was simply unbearable. He didn't understand for how much longer Everia was going to hurt them. She and her accomplice had tracked them today, and had also stealthily taken possession of a magic mineral deposit, as if all this could help Everia win Cashin's attention. Everia sighed, covered her face with her hand, and asked Harry to get out of there quickly, but she also began to feel ill. You're running away, Cashin shouted, demanding that Everia apologize to Catherine immediately. Everia only had time to turn around before everything had already happened. Catherine's eyes opened wide with fear and surprise. Cashin didn't understand at all what had happened, and how he had ended up in such a deplorable situation. Where are you putting your hands? A loud shout was heard. Harry twisted the prince's arms behind his back and forced him to bow. Harry was simply furious. He declared that if he did something like that again, Cashin wouldn't get out so easily. The demon threw the prince aside with force, and he flew towards the wall and crashed into it. Catherine ran towards him to ask if he was okay. Everia, are you okay? Harry asked, approaching his companion. Everia looked thoughtfully at the second couple. They sat on the floor, and Catherine looked at the prince, and now he had already raised his gaze. The prince watched Everia and Harry leave. At that very moment they held hands. Let's go, Harry, Everia said firmly, and they turned around and walked away. The demon muttered something unintelligible in response. Everia was determined. She had no intention of staying there. The sky over the city houses was clear, and spring wildflowers were blooming on the lawn. Together with Harry, Everia spent time during these sunny days. No, this cannot be, the demon exclaimed, looming over the girl who was sitting at a table in the garden. I'll be right back, shouted Harry, furious. Everia asked him where he was going. Harry said he was simply going to go and give that Cashin, or whatever his name was, a good beating. He got off too easy after daring to attack the summoner Harry. Jupiter unexpectedly supported him, saying that he too was extremely indignant. For all this, he didn't understand how a man who mastered the high art of fencing could attack a civilian in that way. Harry exclaimed that he agreed and that the piece of iron could go with him. But Jupiter didn't argue. Everia Oberon was destined to be a villain by the author of the original book, and being treated badly was something normal in this world. There was nothing that could be done about it. This is what Everia herself always thought, or rather, the one who now occupied her place. But Harry and Jupiter proved that that point was wrong, and suddenly she felt good. Harry asked worriedly if everything was okay with Everia. The girl admitted with a smile that it was the first time something like that had happened to her, that someone had gotten angry because they had felt offended. She had never thought before that it could be so pleasant. Everia thanked Harry and Jupiter from the bottom of her heart. Meanwhile, Harry took the sacred sword in his hands and was ready to leave. He blushed and declared that from now on, he would ensure that no one would even think about offending his summoner. She could stop worrying about that. Jupiter said he was also ready to take care of his mistress. Everia laughed. Everything was very reassuring, she said. As she had expected, Cashin had kept the recent incident a secret, since the damage to his reputation would have outweighed any potential benefit, such as rumors that the prince had received a kick in the butt from the night of his ex-fiancée. Also, Avery's 18th birthday was approaching. The mansion servants were completely occupied. Absolutely, the whole house was upside down during the preparation of the banquet hall. The maids ordered many candles, placed new tablecloths. For Avery, it wasn't so easy these days. The girl paced nervously from one corner of the room to another, thinking about the different people on the list, whether they were her enemies, and many of them really were. Unable to bear it, Everia threw the list away. It was too complicated for her. It would have been better to have drawn up several business plans. Emma suggested that the mistress go rest. The maid rushed to pour tea into the mistress's cup. Everia collapsed onto the sofa and groaned that she didn't understand why she couldn't invite guests at her own discretion, why she had to ask her to make a list. Emma replied that organization was one of the important skills for a lady. Initially, this was also an impossible task for the true Everia, because she was a true villain. And wherever you looked, there were tense relationships. Emma stood in front of her mistress. She asked who Lady Everia would like to invite. Everia realized she had never thought about it that way. Emma exclaimed that that was such an important day, that it was necessary to invite those whose blessing was truly important to the lady, and spend the happiest day of her life. Well, if not, then send invitations based on title and reputation. This is important for social status. Everia found it very sweet. She said she herself would send the first invitation to Emma, although she wouldn't be able to attend as a guest. But the idea of inviting whoever she wanted seemed brilliant to her. Now things should definitely go better. It was a pity that it wasn't possible to invite the wyvern, but Emma said she thought it was completely impossible. At that moment, Harry was standing in the hall, near one of the wyverns. The demon looked at the wyvern and petted it. The wyvern smelled him and petted him itself. Everia watched them and thought that Harry really was an incredibly handsome man. By the way, Everia suddenly thought, with Harry's arrival, suddenly there were too many idle maids among the maids. They crowded at the door, discussing how adorable he was and wondering what he was chatting about with the dragon. The next instant, the maids shuddered and retreated. "How dare you stare at him?" Everia could have said, but she never said such a thing. She only looked at them with malicious joy, and the maids were already scared, and they begged their mistress for forgiveness and pleaded for mercy. Everia actually simply smiled at the admiration they felt for her appearance. Thank you," they said, bowing, and Everia thought it would be better for her to leave with a normal face. She also thought that without realizing it, she had obtained a monopoly on Harry, who saw her and greeted her. "Harry," Everia said, looking at him. The demon smiled happily. He didn't react in any way to Everia's villainous smile. Everia approached Harry and asked him if he was exercising. The demon replied that he was probably just having fun. He said they simply had a little practice in the air. The dragon seemed to disagree, and Everia asked not to push it too hard. Harry asked why the girl was looking at him so strangely. She replied that she thought he had very nice hands. Then Everia said that he shouldn't hide them, that there was no need to be so bad, that she wasn't going to touch them at all. Harry began to argue that he wasn't bad at all. Suddenly, the girl extended her hand towards the demon's face and said that there were his hands, that she could look at them as much as she wanted. "Wait," he exclaimed suddenly, almost knocking the girl down. "What is this?" he asked, grabbing Evria's hand. "What?" Evria asked again, with absolute bewilderment. The demon looked intently at the girl's hands, asked why her hands were so pale, and why there were no visible veins in them. Harry asked worriedly if the summoner was eating well, and Everia replied that she had actually gained weight. Harry asked her what she meant when she said she had gained weight, and Everia nodded several times. "Harry," Everia said when the demon suddenly let her go and retreated. And then, to the girl's surprise, he wrapped his arms around her waist. "Oh," Everia shouted when Harry lifted her into the air and asked her why she was so light if she had gained weight as she claimed. She replied with a smile that it seemed that Harry wasn't taking into account at all his own demonic strength, so that it would be difficult for him to lift her. She would have to weigh as much as a wyvern. "Lady Oberon," a voice suddenly sounded very close. Everia turned abruptly and saw Sorel standing near the stairs. Everia told Harry to let her go. Elroy said he thanked the lady for accepting his request to see the Dragon Knights. Everia approached the knight and told him that thanks to the book he lent her, she had learned a lot, so she simply couldn't refuse, and with the help of the armor reference book, she was able to easily train her Dragon Knights. After this, she introduced Harry to Sir Royce as the best Dragon Knight. Harry and Royce stared at each other. "Silver hair and red eyes," said Royce. The knight was sure they had already met Harry. "How is this possible and where?" Everia exclaimed, trying to cover Harry's face. She was afraid that Harry's essence could be revealed. She simply didn't understand what to do in such a case. Royce said that his ancestor, Sam Royce, was a great artist, and that several of his works still survive to this day. Now Royce wanted to know if Sir Harry was a descendant of the Archmage, as he looked exactly like the man in one of his paintings. Everia smiled with relief. Well, usually people don't even realize that he could be the Archmage himself, and not his relative at all. Harry claimed that his ancestors really possessed magic, the night. He was surprised, and Everia hurried to pretend surprise at such an interesting coincidence. She suggested going to see wyvern riding. Harry replied that simply watching would be very boring. He asked him if perhaps he could go for a ride himself, and he would supervise everything. Royce asked if that was really possible, and Harry said that of course it was. From Aviria's point of view, Harry was acting very suspiciously. In the air, the wyvern performed tricks, triple aerial turns, performed a steep dive, and tested the rider's endurance in every way. Averia wondered if Harry had planned all this on purpose. The demon laughed. He was really having fun. He offered the knight to do another circle, but he could only respond with an indistinct scream. When they returned to land again, Averia asked him if he was okay. A radiant Harry clearly seemed like he was having a lot of fun. Averia told him worriedly that if he felt dizzy, he should first rest at the mansion, and only then leave, but the knight muttered that it wasn't worth it. He assured that he needed to return to the castle as soon as possible. Averia said that the commander knight was very busy. Royce said that in any case, Averia and Harry would find out soon. He asked if by any chance they knew anything about the sacred sword hidden in the cloudy mountains. And Averia's heart began to beat faster. They caught it, said Nightingale. Royce's squad is currently looking for the person who took out the sword. They were late in discovering Jupiter because its location had been hidden for a long time. Jupiter asked Averia if they were talking about him, and Averia thought she had no idea why they were looking for it. Averia asked him directly why the royal detachment of knights was looking for this man. Sir Royce replied that Averia probably hadn't heard of the rumors circulating in the royal family. The sacred sword is closely associated with the royal family of Charente. The family founder took out the sword and told the whole world that he was the owner of the sacred sword. But Harry hurried to call those words a lie and say that he hadn't understood it. History has preserved the words of the founder, in which he said that he created this country not for the sake of the sword, but for the sake of the people and the gods, and therefore he left this sword not for himself, but for his descendants. But Harry insisted that he didn't take the sword because he couldn't obtain it, and simply polished this ancient story until it shone. Everyone believed that whoever took out the sacred sword would become the second coming, and would bring prosperity to this generation. Royce said that furthermore, the person who obtains the sword will become the first heir to the royal throne. Upon hearing this, Jupiter exclaimed that its mistress will now become queen. Having said that, the night Royce said it was time to say goodbye. After Royce dropped that bombshell of information and left, Jupiter and Harry pounced on Averia, asking her what she was doing. The girl replied that she couldn't calm down and told them both to be quiet. The first thing Averia did was write a letter to Rapasha, and now she was waiting for a reply as soon as possible. According to her, the method to identify the sacred sword is related to the sheath that comes with it. She also said that the only way to recognize the sacred sword is to insert it into the sheath. Harry said that if they caught Averia, she could say it was an ordinary magic sword. Jupiter agreed with this, but Averia couldn't believe they were so calm. There was really only one way, but if that were the case, there will no longer be any worries. It's just that for a time, Averia will have to walk without Jupiter, who said he understood his mistress's intentions, but he was definitely ready to wait for her. Averia promised that, in exchange, the day she took out the dagger again, she would polish it carefully until it shone. Jupiter exclaimed that he would wait for that day with impatience, and that, until then, he would simply hibernate. Then, Averia was found by a man she never expected to see today. It was her brother, and the girl asked him if something had happened. That he said, and handed her the parchment. Averia turned around and couldn't help letting out a gasp of surprise. "What is this?" she asked, looking at her brother. The brother replied that it was a list of gifts for her birthday. She had to leave there about 30 things she wanted to receive. At this moment, Averia said with resignation, dropping her hands with that long list. Her brother said that after Averia chose the gifts, she could focus on her father's work and send him the list. "Wait," Averia shouted upon seeing he was already leaving. She said the list was too long, and she was busy with other things. At that moment, her brother pointed out with indifference that, after all, those were her gifts. Judging by the expression on his face, one would think that Averia would be in trouble if she didn't choose her own gifts. Averia had said directly that she didn't care what she received for her birthday. So if her brother wanted her to accept, he would have to listen to her request. Currently, sapphires are supplied only to the royal family and the Magicians' Association during the meeting with the king. They made attracting customers a priority. Emma told Averia that the most important thing now was her birthday and her coming-of-age ceremony. However, Averia's image was too bad to handle everything all by herself. So now the sapphires were sold not in her personal name, but in the name of all the lands of Irel. Everia had a sapphire brooch because it was imbued with aromatic magic, and a pleasant scent constantly emanated from the brooch. Everia's brother suggested that in that case, the brooch must be incredibly expensive, but Everia replied that the sapphires were supplied to the Magicians' Association at a reduced price, so the price of the brooch wasn't that high. Stones and jewels of our own production, Everia stated. She asked if everyone here knew the traditional processing method. These, in turn, resort to a simple method associated with the hardening of tree sap. And it is precisely here that the great advantage lies. That is why Everia would like her brother to wear this brooch on his clothes, and then walk around the hall during receptions, exuding a wonderful scent. Together with Harry, Everia proclaimed with a smile, pointing to the demon. She said she spent a long time choosing, and finally selected only 5 places. All events are taking place today. Everia said there was no need to linger for long, just make a circle and return. Archibald asked why he had to go somewhere with his sister's guard. Why? Everia said, after all, the more flowers, the prettier they are. It's hard to refute this statement. With a sigh, Archibald told Everia to quickly make a gift list, and then he asked her if she had another brooch. Everia displayed brooches, cufflinks, and rings that contained pure magic. Archibald said the cufflinks would do, and then told her to take them to their father, which surprised Everia. She laughed and said that he should have offered them to their father first, and that he should have done it himself, since it was Everia who should have brought them. It turned out that Archibald himself had to visit about 5 important places in one day. So in this matter, he had to rely on his sister. Yes, Everia said, while walking slowly to fulfill that obligation she had assumed. In this way, she arrived at the huge doors of the Duke's chambers. Everia sighed deeply, feeling as if she were going to the teacher's room to be scolded. But during her meeting with her father in Irel, everything turned out not to be as bad as she initially expected. She felt very uncomfortable when she and her father were alone. She knocked decisively on the door and announced that it was Everia who had arrived. In response, the girl only heard absolute silence. Everia looked around, wondering if he really wasn't there, although she really wanted to finish all this as soon as possible. Suddenly, her father appeared completely out of nowhere behind her. The girl turned around and screamed in surprise. "Come in," her father said, but Everia still couldn't calm her heart, which was beating too fast. She couldn't understand what had happened. He was often so sad, but today something happened to him. It seemed he was in a very bad mood. It was important to wait for the right moment, quickly give him the cufflinks, and leave. Everia sat down and said those were sapphire cufflinks, the first produced in their lands. She said they contained pure magic. It would be absolutely wonderful if Dad accepted them as a gift. She waited with great excitement to see if he would finally say something about this or not. They needed to finish this and get out of there quickly, so Everia offered to help her father fasten the cufflinks. If he refused, then she would simply want to leave, as long as he said something quickly. And said it was fine. Fasten them, he said severely. Everia was so confused and scared that she was lost and didn't immediately understand what to do. She froze and looked at the hands extended towards her. Everia asked if it wouldn't be easier to start on one side. Yes, of course, said the father, clearing his throat nervously. Everia placed the first sapphire cufflink on his shirt cuff. It turned out to be much harder than she expected. Finally, Everia succeeded. She couldn't help letting out a shout of joy. And at that very moment, her father announced that they were preparing to get engaged. It was this news that ruined Evria's father's mood today. He was talking about the Crown Prince and Catherine Utverson, the main characters of the original book. Ah, that's right, Everia exclaimed. It turns out the work has already advanced to this point. Everia sat in her place at the table, and now she and her father simply looked at each other. Furthermore, said the father nervously, their engagement date coincided with another event. This caused undisguised anger in my father, because this event was Everia's birthday. Since the information had already spread everywhere, it was impossible to change the date. Everia's mind immediately returned to the scene in which Harry had smashed Cashin against the wall. And Everia thought that the prince was simply a terribly petty creature if he had done such a thing because of that incident. This meant that there would be very few guests at Everia's birthday party. No wonder the Duke's mood was ruined, for he was faced with a fait accompli. But Everia had already invited everyone she wanted to see, and it wasn't even her real birthday. So she didn't care. Everia, the Duke said significantly, and added that there was no need to worry in advance. He promised that his daughter's birthday would still be the best. Of course, he said, literally boiling with anger. Everia sincerely thanked her father for this. Conversations began about which side the majority would be on, and they even started discussing who would go to which party. Thus, little by little the situation began to gain momentum, and finally society was divided into two camps. At first, there was no particular problem. In such a situation, it was impossible to remain neutral. It was necessary to clearly state one's own position. And as a result, Evria's birthday acquired a political context. In addition to everything else, Archibald and Harry's actions were crowned with surprising success. Sapphire orders rained down, and Evria had a lot of work to do in the capital. Evria, with the help of her maids, was preparing for her vacation. She asked Emma to reread part of a document for her. Emma asked if the mistress wanted to forget about work, at least during beauty treatments. Evria objected that, since her business was going so well, she simply couldn't afford to take a break. But Emma exclaimed that that wouldn't do, because the birthday party was so famous that everyone was talking about it. Evria didn't dispute that claim. She simply reminded her that they had agreed to make concessions to each other, and Emma would have to accept that. Emma looked at the document she had in her hands with a doomed look. She looked up from its lines, and Evria shuddered. Suddenly, Emma said that after the procedures, she would need to introduce someone to the mistress. Evria was waiting for her hair, makeup, and outfit. Anywhere and under any circumstances, they will turn the girl into the brightest heroine of the ball. After all, there is a hairdresser named Daisy, a makeup artist named Jenny, and a stylist named Lana. These three sorceresses were going to take care of Evria's image. Evria applauded, and Emma whispered in her ear that it was difficult to invite them. First, they met to talk about the outfit, then they could choose the hairstyle and the makeup, and definitely take care of the skin and hair. Normally, a white dress is worn for a coming-of-age celebration, but dark colors suited Evria much better. Evria thought that Catherine would also wear a white dress for the engagement party. To avoid talking about supposed lingering regrets, it would be better to choose another color. So she nodded and replied that she also preferred dark colors. "Yes," exclaimed one of the girls, approving of the lady's excellent taste. The girls asked Evria what she thought about wearing a red dress with a closed collar, but with an audaciously open back. And then they said that a mermaid-style dress with elegant pulled-up hair would also look elegant. And it was very hard to refuse open shoulders. Everyone thought seriously about this difficult choice. Then one of them asked who would accompany the lady. It was also necessary to think about his outfit. Evria replied that her companion would be her guard, and pointed to Harry. The demon looked at them with a very dark gaze. All the girls immediately felt a wave of admiration. They were delighted with the Dragon Knight from Irel. It turned out that among the Dragon Knights, there really was a rare beauty, whose silver hair was so beautiful. Harry was surprised to have to accompany Evria, but she hadn't even thought about notifying him in advance, and no one was going to ask him what he wanted. Evria looked at him and said that of course she would go to that party with Harry. The next moment, she realized that it would be difficult for him to be there because of the large crowd of people. Evria wondered who could replace him. The Duke and Archibald were her family, but they still acted like children. The Knights of Irel were too simple. Lionel was an aristocrat, so he didn't need to be taught manners, Evria thought. But at that moment, Harry said that nothing could be done, and she repeated those words without thinking after him. Harry said he would go, but the girl finished the sentence for him and said he would do it with Lionel. Both heard each other's words and looked at each other in astonishment. Evria was sure that Harry had no intention of going anywhere. Harry was indignant because he hadn't said anything like that, and with this incompetent knight, Evria would simply look ridiculous. Evria objected that Jupiter had been working hard with Lionel lately, so he was already doing well. Harry walked resolutely towards the chair where Evria was sitting. Evria raised her head and looked at the demon who had approached her. "Will you allow me to accompany you?" Harry asked, kneeling before her. The demon looked Evria in the eyes with a very determined and somber gaze. Evria was even bewildered by this situation that she had never expected. All of Evria's assistants looked at them, filled with even more affection. Evria placed her hand in the demon's palm. "Of course, Harry," she said, agreeing to go with the demon. Once all procedures were completed, Evria had to look at herself. Emma applauded with joy. The other assistants asked her how she was, and responded that everything was wonderful. To be honest, Evria herself didn't think she would say something like that, but she looked at her reflection and asked if it was really her, that stunning beauty. In fact, Evria has always been beautiful. She simply hid her beauty behind her rudeness and bold expression, which is why she was often feared. On the other hand, the main character, Catherine, had an ordinary appearance. But the more you looked at her, the more charming she became. Well, that was a classic description of a main character. Finally, Harry arrived, and Everia looked at the girls and didn't understand what had suddenly happened with their facial expressions. The girls were completely charmed by the demon's appearance, and Emma asked the fairy dog to wait there. "What's wrong?" Harry asked, bewildered. Then Everia simply called him. The demon turned when he heard her voice and suddenly blushed. Harry stood in front of Averia, completely stunned, and Averia said she felt like her face was going to explode. "Come on, cry with that pretty face." Averia pounced on the demon, trying to poke him in the cheek. Harry dodged it and asked her to stop. He covered his face with his hands and asked them to stop making fun of him. Averia asked the demon if she really looked that beautiful today. It seemed that was indeed the case, as Harry didn't even make any comment to Averia in response. She watched his embarrassment with a smile. Harry asked why Averia kept laughing, but she didn't give a clear answer. "Who am I?" she said, leaning as close as possible to the demon. She suggested that perhaps her laughter made Harry tremble, and his heart begins to beat rapidly. Incredibly fast, Everia brought her face close to his, and with a sparkle in her gaze, asked him if she was right. Everia saw that Harry had leaned in somehow. He really was that surprised. She apologized to the demon, said Harry was very sweet, but he told her to leave. Everia stroked his hair and asked him if he would really prefer that she leave. She asked anxiously what Harry was whispering. The demon grabbed the girl by the arm above the elbow and pulled it abruptly. Harry simply pulled Avery towards him and buried his face in her back. His heart was beating very loudly and fast. He asked her why she couldn't just stop laughing and leave when he asked her to. He reminded her that, in fact, he was a great demon that she should fear. Avery asked him if it wasn't wonderful not to be so afraid of him. Harry said that was true, but she knew what he was capable of, and yet, for some reason, she wasn't afraid of him. Everia asked him if she should be afraid, if Harry really wanted to scare her. But she didn't fear anything other than death. Harry replied that he felt she had become even more terrible. He held the girl's hand. Everia remembered that the demon had been charged with energy recently. She reminded him that it would be problematic if her makeup fell off, so kissing her was out of the question. And the demon pressed himself against the girl's hand. Harry declared that he does not allow Averia to hug or kiss anyone other than him. The summoner belonged only to Harry. Colorful fireworks burst into flames, with a distinctive crackling sound in the darkening sky. The ceremonial hall didn't seem crowded. On the contrary, it impressed with its emptiness. There were practically no guests, and those who came whispered that it would have been worth choosing the engagement, especially because there wasn't a single important person in sight. They even discussed the fact that, although it wasn't too late, they could still leave and go to the royal family's celebration, and the Baron listened to this while walking among the guests. "Well, go ahead then, since you're going to do it," he thought. "Let everyone who wants to leave go now, because everything is just beginning." Suddenly loud noises were heard, announcing the beginning of the ceremonial part. "Look, those are dragon knights." A loud shout was heard, and then the guests saw the wyverns behind the knights. The guests began to discuss if it was true that each of them had taken an oath of loyalty to Lady Everia. Then a procession of dwarves appeared, such rare guests in human cities. People couldn't believe it. How could this happen? Because this race never liked contact with people, but today they arrived even in the capital. After the dwarves came the owner of the sapphire mine, Count Nat. "Let's begin our evening," a solemn voice sounded. It was at that moment when the royal knight commander, Royce, and the first prince of the kingdom, Lidon Geraint, entered, looking around and saying they had arrived just in time. It seemed that all the guests were in their place, said Everia's father. Now it was time to begin. The music began to play, so that the main event could finally begin. The appearance of the heroine of the ball herself, the one because of whom all this began. "Come on, Harry," Everia said, placing her hand on the demon's, and together they moved forward to face the guests. The prince and the knight stood frozen, watching what was happening. The dwarves applauded and exclaimed that Everia was so beautiful. Everia's father and brother simply admired the girl. Everia looked truly dazzling that day. She called Jupiter, and the sacred sword responded immediately, adding an extra shine to the girl's appearance. Everia asked Harry if the halo surrounding her seemed too much. Jupiter complained that it didn't even understand what the lady was talking about, because of all its abilities. This was the most amazing one. Harry agreed that Averia looked absolutely dazzling today, and Averia was going to put Jupiter away because they might notice it. But when these two unite, they become so stubborn. Well, at least thanks to you, Averia thought. It had the desired effect on all the guests. Harry leaned towards Averia and said that she was beautiful even without the magic aura. And Jupiter agreed with this, and the girl asked since when the two of them had become such close friends. Averia, the Duke called to the girl as he approached her. The Duke said it was a perfectly splendid appearance for the protagonist of the ball, and Averia said she was happy it had turned out that way. Well, let's go, Averia said to her father. The girl leaned on his elbow to follow him to the guests. She realized that her father hadn't forgotten to wear the cufflinks she had given him. It seemed he liked the gift. The Duke said he thanked everyone present for coming to congratulate his daughter on her 18th birthday. This girl, my precious daughter, Averia Oberon, said the Duke. Averia, said the Duke, and she turned towards him. He congratulated her on her coming of age and handed her his gift. It was a precious necklace of incredible beauty. Shouts were heard among the crowd, and someone said this is Exiled eye. It is believed that it was lost during the war and was given to the Empire to later be exhibited in a museum. Exiled eye had a special meaning, as the first queen wore it at her coronation. Several attempts were made to return this necklace to the kingdom, but a considerable sum was demanded for it. So all attempts failed. The Duke explained that Averia herself had said she wanted to own it, but the girl objected that she had written it that way only because she wanted to shorten the list. The Duke asked if Averia didn't like her gift. No, I am very happy, father, Averia assured him. But she was worried that her father had put the guests in an uncomfortable situation by giving such an incredible gift at the beginning of the evening. The next moment, Archibald approached, and Averia greeted him. He gave Averia a pair of emerald earrings from Hulaiden, and she thought that now she wouldn't feel so embarrassed giving a gift to the next person, even if those earrings were also incredibly difficult to get. Thank you, Averia said and took the box in her hands. After that, she received many different gifts. Of course, none of them could compare to Exiled eye, but all of them were extremely expensive. She especially remembered how Rashi ran towards her shouting. She extended her gift in the palm of her hand, and Averia asked her what it was. Rashi said that they are giving Averia the universe. She just needs to wait a little. Just a minute of patience is needed. The sharp blade split the blue stone, and sparks jumped everywhere. It was incredibly beautiful, Averia said with enthusiasm, admiring it. The full moon rose over the mansion, and night fell. Averia went out to the balcony and found Harry standing at the railing. She called him. The demon asked her what she was doing there, and Averia replied that she had come to dance with her partner. She got very close to him and told him they could start, and if Harry didn't know how, she would teach him. Harry noticed that Averia was unusually cheerful. Harry said Averia was actually asking if he hadn't learned to dance since the moment the Archmage founded the kingdom. He placed his hand on Averia's back, and upon realizing that there was no fabric for the dress there, he blushed. Averia replied that that design was proposed from the beginning, and Harry had already seen it. The demon replied that he wasn't himself at that moment and didn't notice. Averia asked him if it was because of her incredible beauty. Then let's dance quickly, Harry exclaimed. They looked towards the full moon that floated high in the sky, illuminating their makeshift ballroom. They spun in a dance, illuminated by the moon's silver rays. Harry asked if Averia wanted a birthday gift, and she asked him what kind. The demon leaned very close to the girl. In the moon's silver light, the two figures merged into a single silhouette. United in a kiss, Harry kissed Averia, and her face suddenly blushed. She had barely regained her senses when he started moving away from her. He had transmitted something to her during the kiss. As she stepped back, Averia swallowed nervously while looking into his eyes. What is this? Averia asked him, and Harry replied that it was a birthday gift. It was something strange, like a bead. Harry replied that that strange thing was just a piece of his soul. He explained to her that the last time Averia disappeared, he couldn't find her immediately. But if a piece of his soul was with her, the demon would come wherever she was. She would only need to call him. Happy birthday, Averia. Harry said. Harry, Averia said, looking at him. She asked him why he hadn't given her something so useful and good from the beginning. What? Harry muttered with incredible astonishment. Averia asked him if it had any side effects, like those that occur when taking the wrong pill. And Harry clearly panicked at her insistence. Hey, give it back. He finally managed to say. Everia said she didn't know for sure, but she could guess that this decision hadn't been so easy for Harry. She was grateful to him for that. Harry said that the piece of the soul still affects them both. Everia asked how this influence manifested. Harry replied that if she got hurt, he would feel the same pain. And since only Everia had swallowed a piece of his soul, even if Harry got hurt, she wouldn't feel any pain, so she had nothing to worry about at all. The demon shrugged and asked if it was true that his gift today was the most precious. Harry, Everia said, and asked if it would be possible that if she died, it would somehow affect him too. You worry too much, Harry said. Harry asked irritably who Everia thought he was, since he was so strong that a human wound or death couldn't affect him. After Evria's death, he will only lose power proportional to this particle. Suddenly, Evria grabbed Harry's hand. She demanded that he take back the piece of his soul. She cannot accept such a thing, and therefore, he must take it immediately. Harry exclaimed that she didn't want to do that. Why should he take back what he had already given? Everia explained that she didn't want the demon to be weakened or endangered because of her, since that would put the weakened demon at risk of natural selection. Harry, who lived 1,000 years, was going to sacrifice himself for one whose lifespan was 100 years at most. This time, Evria herself leaned in to kiss the demon. She tried to force him to take back what he had given her. She tried to insist that he do it immediately. The force with which Everia attacked him finally caused Harry to fall to the ground. The girl shouted at him that she simply didn't want to take that responsibility for her. Harry asked when he said he was taking responsibility. He simply told her to swallow a piece of the soul and walk with it. She pretended to be a self-sufficient and confident egoist, but in reality, she turned out to be powerless before him. Hey Everia, a voice said. The girl rushed to stand up in one jump. And where are you going? Harry asked, looking over his shoulder as she walked away, making a loud noise with her heels. Everia declared that she didn't want to see that stubborn demon anymore, so she ran away, back to the hall, and slammed the door shut behind her. Harry looked at her thoughtfully. For a moment, Harry hunched over and turned around. Well, seriously, which one of us is still being stubborn? The demon complained. A moment later, the doors opened again and Everia appeared on the threshold. Harry's help, the girl shouted. The demon asked her if she had forgotten how she had run out of there a moment before, but Everia shouted that that wasn't the problem at all. When Everia took Elroyce's hand, what she feared so much happened. Elle's magic bracelet worked, and everyone around her saw the sacred sword with their own eyes. She said it had nothing to do with Jupiter, but no one believed her, and now she was angry. Because in the first place, she hadn't wanted any halo. She told Jupiter not to do anything no matter what happened. Jupiter said he would do what his mistress told him, and Harry wondered if he should break it right then and there. What? Will you fly with a flash of purification? The dagger was indignant. Everia barked that she was already nervous, so her companions should immediately put an end to this whole farce. Everia wanted to discuss what they would do if an emergency arose. Harry asked her what she meant by that, and Everia explained that if she pretended to faint, Harry would appear in the confusion, grab Everia, and run away. So this is the sacred sword, said Elroyce. Everia stood in front of the knight, and Harry asked her if it was time to grab it and run away. My God, what are you talking about? Is this even possible? Everia said. Elroyce said he was sure of it. His ancestors left paintings of the sacred sword. He couldn't help but recognize it. People around her whispered that Sir El's words could be trusted, which meant that the sacred sword had just appeared, and that this would be the new king. Everia laughed and said that they simply looked very similar. Elroyce asked if it wasn't the sacred sword, if he could destroy it right then and there. And in return, he would buy Everia as many other swords as she wanted. Everia replied that she didn't want anyone to break her sword, but she was even more afraid of a possible misunderstanding. And that's why she could give him the sword. She thought that anyway, he was just pretending he was going to break it. It was just a test. She thought the knight was completely wrong in trying to deceive her. Elroyce resolutely drew his sword from its scabbard. He said that his own sword's nickname was Destructive Wave, so it was capable of destroying anything. Everia thought it was fine. Jupiter would simply deflect the sword anyway. Jupiter was also holding up well. There was nothing to worry about. One of the dwarves watched all this attentively. The attempt to break the sacred sword resulted in nothing. Everia didn't look at it, but closed her eyes for fear of Jupiter. In complete silence, she removed her hand from her face. Many people suddenly knelt before Everia. She heard that all this was because she was the owner of the sacred sword. Now the Royal Order of Knights will protect her, and for Everia it was a complete failure. The guests bowed deeply before the Lady of the Sacred Sword. This was the second coming of King Ephron Geraint, the Sun King, who was destined to save the kingdom. Elroyce knelt before Everia and asked her to take his sword. The hesitant girl reached out towards the sword. Jupiter shone brightly when it appeared in her hand. Everia shouted at Jupiter for doing such a foolish thing, and the dagger replied that it thought since they had been caught, it would be worth doing it in some spectacular way. And the sacred sword invited the hostess to look closely at the result. Everyone was shocked by the sacred sword's radiance. Then Everia decided to go ahead with her plan, something Harry didn't immediately realize she had in mind. The guests screamed in alarm because the owner of the sacred sword had suddenly fainted. The next day, the whole kingdom was in an uproar because the owner of the sacred sword had appeared on her 18th birthday. The owner of the sacred sword had awakened. It was Everia of the Oberon family, illuminated by divine light. Everyone who heard this thought only one thing: why shouldn't he have been in Evria's place? People in the tavern commented on this, and clinking their beer mugs, they drank to the legendary event. A happy day for the whole kingdom. What nonsense, said His Highness the Crown Prince. He didn't understand how this could have happened. Everything was going perfectly until the engagement.